if Larry is on the line. And I don't hear Larry. And Chris. So Chris, are you on the line? Oh, there's Chris. I see Chris on video. Okay, so for the committee members, we have Commissioner Bosevich, Commissioner Farr, Commissioner Sorensen, Commissioner Burney, Commissioner Buck, and then I saw Dale's name on. We have Dawn, myself, and I see Chris as well. So that's it for the committee members. Is anybody interested in hearing a list of the other attendees to the meeting? Okay.
Herb?
Yes.
It's Larry. I'm trying to get into the Go meeting thing, but
here we go.
I think we just made it. I'll be right there. There's my tech support.
Okay, so let's go ahead.
Also tech support.
I think while Larry's getting going here, we'll go ahead and get started. There's my agenda. Okay, so the first thing under committee business we have so if you're not speaking, can somebody mute their mic? There we go. So we'll move on to working with the minutes for the meeting of November 5th. Does anybody, other than the modifications that Ms. Moody presented, does anybody else have any changes to the minutes for May 5th?
Chair, I don't think we were live when I gave my minutes, and actually it sounds like somebody is both on the phone and video. That's usually what causes this feedback. So if you're also on the phone, you'll have to.
Sounds like remembrance at Woodstock.
Yeah. Is it just me, or is there ringing in our ears?
No.
I think we still have somebody on phone and video.
And your audio on at the same time. Got to mute your phone and your computer, Larry.
See if Tommy can mute everybody for a minute.
Sound.
The administrator can actually mute people in.
I think you'll actually have to hang up your phone if you're getting sound through the computer.
That's it.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Excellent. So was there any other discussion for the minutes for May 5th? I have one item actually, Ms. Moody, this may be a question for you as much as anything else. On page 5 in your presentation, there's the part where you presented the future cautions, and the fourth bullet note is of note is COVID-19, and the last sub-bullet of that says not at risk, and it says property taxes, contracts, and grants. And if I remember correctly, what you actually said is with property taxes, it was because of the lag in property taxes, but that for grants and contracts, it was specifically for the ones that had already been awarded and that were already in process, that those weren't at risk. Is that more of a clarification? Because I think there could potentially be, could there be other grants and contracts that are at risk?
Or that is what I said. You're right. The bullets, I think, just say those three things. And so that's probably why the minutes, but you did just summarize exactly what I said, and correct. Future grants and contracts would be up for renewal.
even though they're during this budget year?
If we have any that haven't already been determined, then potentially,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But typically you will, sorry, one more clarification maybe, is that the county doesn't budget grants that it hasn't already been awarded. That's our internal policy. So you should see only revenue that has already been awarded and determined in the budget.
Okay. Could we get an update for the minutes on that section that says already awarded grants and contracts? Because I think that's actually what you stated.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay. If there's no other modifications to the minutes, I'd accept the motion.
I'll move approval.
Mr. Chair, I move to accept the minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Second.
Can you get a second? Okay, so let's say that Jay moved and Pat seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes as modified, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all.
That's pretty good, Jay. You made the motion and you seconded it.
Okay, before we move on to the district attorney, were there any other questions from committee members for budget staff before we move forward?
I just
Okay, I think
apologize for my, whatever I did. I won't happen again.
We're all good. Thank you, Larry. So let's go ahead and move on to section 3. Ms. Perlow, if you will, please.
Chair Vlodman, members of the Budget Committee, it's an unusual meeting this way. Welcome to the new people on the Budget Committee. I am only going to go over briefly what the DA's office does, so I would invite you to contact budget staff if you want to have a more in-depth of the work that we do here in the DA's office. So with that, I would get started if somebody can put on slide number 1. I'm not driving my own bus here.
We were all sent your presentation in advance, so we have it. Those of us that can read email at the same time.
Great. All right, well, then I will just start with the department overview. The DA's office is made up of 3 divisions now. We combined some functions in the office into 3 divisions. So that was new this past year. It gave me some relief because I didn't have a chief deputy in the office any longer. I lost that position or relinquished that position so that I could have more lawyers handling the violent crimes. So the DA's office is made up of criminal prosecution, including juvenile, family law division, support services is the 3rd division. That's the new one that covers victim services, death investigations, and the prosecution clerical staff. I am moving to the next slide. I'll spend some more time talking about each of those divisions as we go forward. This series of slides is not helpful in the sense that it doesn't dive right into the different divisions first. We're going to start with some of our funding challenges first. There's a pot of money that comes from the state of Oregon called Justice Reinvestment Initiative money. And it is money that is provided to the counties in exchange for the state not having to build a new prison. And so initially it was promised to be about $60 million per biennium, and that has not actually come to fruition. It's been less money than that, but Lane County has been a great recipient of it. And one of the programs that started with Justice Reinvestment Initiative money was what we call the Senate Bill 416 program. and that is a program for high-risk property offenders to divert them from prison. There were 2 positions in the DA's office that were originally funded out of that grant money, and those positions were lost so that other aspects of the program could continue. The Board of Commissioners last year backfilled out of general fund money the $243,607 to retain that staff and maintain our current service levels. We currently prosecute all viable felony cases. Back in 2012, we lost 30% of the staff, and there was a large list of cases that weren't being prosecuted for lack of resources. I am really happy to say that that is no longer the circumstance. We file every viable case that comes to us. And we'll get into those numbers when we get to the criminal division. And next slide. So looking at what the resources are for the district attorney's office, we are mostly a general fund division or department within Lane County, but we do have grants that we receive to run various programs within the office. And on the top of the list that you're looking at on the slide is federal revenue for child support enforcement. We receive 2/3 match from the federal government for every dollar we spend to collect child support for Lane County kids. The state revenue is, most of it's directed toward victim services and again to child support enforcement. And then we have federal pass-through grants from the Violence Against Women Act that provides for our domestic violence investigator. It also provides for 25% of an attorney from the major crimes team to be on the team that we created to investigate and support sexual assault investigations on the U of O campus and involving U of O students. And then you can see further down the list that we have a VOCA grant for victim services, and then a new program that started 2 years ago or a year and a half ago with Oregon Department of Transportation money for a DUI investigator. That grant actually has a step down, and so the county is picking up as the step down goes through from general fund money. But it's been a great program and a great partnership. And then we have fees and charges for income, including discovery revenue. Discovery is providing to the defense the police reports and all the evidence we have in a criminal case. We charge for that. Most of those cases are court-appointed attorneys, and the state pays that money. Retained attorneys, the client pays it. We also have made about a little over $3,000 this fiscal year in sentencing guideline grids. Lane County produces here, let me grab it. This is the sentencing guideline grid. It's based on rules from the Criminal Justice Commission on when somebody's convicted of a felony based on their criminal history and their level of charges, what their presumptive sentence would be. And Lane County DA's office produces this for everyone in the state. And it has generated about a little over $3,000 in income. Next slide, please. So our COVID-19 resource impact, at this point, because we aren't filing a lot of out of custody cases, we're only filing in custody cases. The money that we would be receiving in discovery fees, those fees that we get for producing the police reports and the evidence to the defense, isn't coming in at the same level now. But all of those cases will be filed starting in June. And so that money is going to continue to come in from that time forward. Our grants are not at risk. Our state revenue is not at risk. At this point, we don't have a financial impact from COVID from this department. Next slide, please. All right, so our 2021 expenditures Our department is really hard to predict costs other than the fixed cost of personnel. And that is the bulk of our budget, but materials and services are particularly unpredictable in this department because we can't control when we need to bring in expert witnesses in a case. And sometimes they have to travel from other parts of the country to get here. We have, it's very common in a domestic violence case for the victim to move with family out of state. And then we have fees to bring them back. And the same thing happens with other witnesses and victims that leave our state and need to be returned for trial. We have a new grand jury recordation requirement that started last July. And so we're now picking up the fees for transcripts. And the state has indicated that they're going to pay for that. We haven't received any money from the state on any of that so far. Costs for technical training as criminal prosecution is becoming really specialized. We have to send the lawyers to particular training so that they are prepared to handle those cases. Anymore, criminal cases are based on electronic evidence, what you find in a cell phone or a computer. So the lawyers need to be trained up in how to obtain that evidence and how to understand it. Car crashes are really technical, and so the lawyers on the crash team go to a car crash reconstruction school. These things are really expensive. We have membership fees in the Oregon District Attorneys Association, and those are going up. And I mentioned grand jury recordation. The cost that the state so far has incurred on our behalf was buying the machine to do the recording and dropping it on our doorstep. Everything else we've been paying for to date. Increased body transport fees. We haven't gotten to all the divisions yet, but the DA's office is responsible for death investigations of unexplained and unattended deaths. And we had a contract with another company to move deceased bodies to and from the morgue and to and from the funeral homes. The funeral homes did not pay the bills as they had previously agreed. And so that company went out of business. We have a new company. Now the county is picking up those costs for transport to the morgue only, but it's increased by about 500% what we pay in body transport fees. We used to only pay the indigent fees. Next slide, please. All right, now it would have been easier, I think, if we had started with the divisions and describing what we do. The criminal division is what most people understand about a DA's office. This is for the prosecution of criminal cases. We receive between 6,000 and 7,000 referrals from the 11 law enforcement agencies in Lane County per year. And then those referrals are divided up between the teams in the criminal prosecution. We have a major crimes team that handles all of our most serious violent crimes, homicides, rapes, child sex abuse, child physical abuse, robberies, and those things. A domestic violence team that specializes in handling the unique challenges that come with domestic violence cases. They're very well trained in that area, and we ask that every domestic violence case in the county come to the DA's office so that they are all handled uniformly. Even though municipal courts would have jurisdiction to handle those cases, we ask for them. We have 2 general felony teams that also are supervising our misdemeanor lawyers at this point. And then we have 1 attorney assigned to the juvenile delinquency cases. That lawyer is housed over at the Surbu Center. And then we have 1 attorney who was recruited and specifically assigned to all of our treatment courts, which includes the drug treatment court, veterans court, and the mental health court. And so that lawyer handles all of the cases that get referred into those programs, and also maintain some of the cases from people who reject, particularly drug treatment court. We have 3 investigators in the criminal division. 2 of the 3 are grant funded. 1 of them is assigned to the domestic violence team, and you saw earlier that we get grant funding for that position. The second grant funded one is the one that ODOT funds for DUI crashes and follow-up investigations. And he also serves warrants for people who don't return to court as directed and have warrants. We have attorneys on call constantly to help law enforcement. There are 6 attorneys on call at any given time to answer police legal advice questions, to respond to vehicle crashes, to respond to homicides, and for blood draw warrants for DUI cases, and for sexual assault, the lawyer who responds to sexual assaults on the U of O campus, and finally, major crimes, a senior attorney on a major crimes. We don't use pagers anymore, but basically on call. Some of the things that the DA's office is tasked with doing, for which we receive no compensation other than the county supporting us through the general fund, that are not criminal prosecution, include civil commitment hearings. County council could handle those under statute, but the board made a decision that the DA's office would handle those. So we do all of the civil commitment hearings. We handle public records appeals for every public agency in Lane County, other than state agencies. That includes the University of Oregon, because somehow somebody cleverly got the legislature to designate them not a state agency. So now we have to handle all of the appeals regarding records from the University of Oregon. We handle expungements. We handle the motions regarding release from sex offender registration requirements and license reinstatements. There's a lot of work going on here that is completely unrelated to criminal prosecution. So also to bring to your attention is the grand jury recordation. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. We have received no money to date from the state. The legislature had a bill this past short session and it didn't get any traction. So the county is picking up all of the costs of grand jury recordation, other than as I mentioned, the recording equipment getting dropped on our doorstep. So we have, staff dealing with the processing of those records, the discovering of the records, protective orders, and all that come along with it, requesting transcripts, reviewing transcripts, and all of that was so far without any resource from the state. Fiscal 19-20 service impacts due to COVID-19. What the DA's office did in response to that, because we are required to be available to the courts to handle criminal prosecution in particular, the staff is on an A-B schedule and the attorneys are appearing in court remotely. Some of them are in the office at any given time. The rest of them are working from home. Our database is cloud-based, and so all of the work can be done anywhere on a laptop. We have reduced our lobby hours. I should mention that family law is also doing that, but because of the state system for child support, they aren't able to work from home the way the criminal division can. So we have reduced the lobby hours for the public to come in. The protective order clinic has reduced hours, and so or reduced services, so that we can maintain a safe environment. This building, I don't know how many of you have come over to the courthouse side, how many of you have seen the DA's office. We don't have the physical ability to maintain 6 feet of distance between people among our clerical staff or in our hallways. And so this has really been the only answer to keep it safe here. And as I mentioned before, we have showing in our budget a decrease in the criminal division personnel because we have created a different configuration of the divisions. And so it looks like the criminal division has lost staff in the budget, but it's just transferred over to the support services division. We do have a 1 FTE decrease in the criminal division due to the domestic violence investigator changing from a DA employee to a trainee position within the sheriff's office. It's the DV investigator position is just a burnout position. It's really difficult to keep somebody having to respond every day to domestic violence cases, investigating them, dealing with victims who are often recanting. They don't want to participate in the prosecution, and we continue with those cases regardless of victim participation. And so the current DV investigator is retiring at the end of the fiscal year, and the sheriff's office has graciously agreed, or the sheriff has graciously agreed to turn this into a training position for someone from patrol to get actual investigative experience. It's a great partnership, and it gives somebody every couple of years an opportunity to come in and learn how to really investigate a case as a detective. So next slide, please. The Family Law Division is housed in a separate building. They aren't in the courthouse. They're in paid or leased space across the street. They are tasked with securing child support for Lane County children and families. They increase parent compliance with healthcare coverage orders for children. The challenge over in the Family Law Division was we don't control what software we use. We don't control what regulations we work under. The state of Oregon bought a new software system for managing child support, and it has been a huge challenge to get up and running. Productivity has dropped dramatically. Lane County was one of the best producers in recovering child support, but this new software has made it really challenging. We couldn't get reports for what our collections have been in a timely fashion, and so it's required a lot of overtime on the staff. It's been a huge stressor, but the staff is great, and they have adapted, and hopefully the state will get the bugs out of their system and we'll all be fine. Again, the service impacts, the court isn't hearing civil cases right now. They're going to start hearing civil cases. Well, they're going to start hearing civil cases with the next phase in of court operations. And so the attorneys are continuing to work. The investigator over there is continuing to work, who also is grant funded. But it's going to be a huge backlog on the court, and collections are probably going to be down because the attorneys aren't able to hold people accountable in the courtroom during this time period. Next slide, please. Support Services Division handles victim services. Victims of crime have constitutional and statutory rights. The Victim Services Division is responsible for enforcing those rights. 100% of victims get notification and have every opportunity to exercise their rights. The Death Investigations team, we have 3 full-time employees to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which if you do the math doesn't work out. So we have some extra help who also provide assistance in that area, generally EMTs and nurses who have medical backgrounds to help with that. They go out to scenes. Some of them don't require an actual going out to the scene, but we support the state medical examiner in this capacity. Our investigators are highly trained professionals. The praise that they get from families who are grieving is incredible. And we pay all of the costs because we don't transport our bodies up to Clackamas, where most people in the state do. We have a state paid forensic pathologist in Lane County who is housed in his house. He doesn't really have an office, and autopsies are performed at Riverbend in their morgue. We pay rent for that. We pay for a morgue tech for that, and we pay for all of the supplies for that. And the clerical staff provides assistance to the processing of the cases. Every job in this office is absolutely essential to making sure that we can prosecute criminals for the crimes that they're committing and support victims. And so every function in here works together as a well-oiled machine to make that happen. And that is based upon the clerical staff. And during this time period of the lawyers working remotely, they've picked up some of the tasks that the clerical staff had been doing and have discovered how much they owe the clerical staff for their support through this, because they're discovering that it's really challenging to do that work. And I've already talked about the impacts of COVID-19 with regard to the department as a whole. So let's move on. Here are our highlights. You have that on a slide. It's really impressive that given some of the challenges that we face, that support enforcement still collected $20 million in child support. We still provided victim services, 17,353 unique services to 2,446 victims. The protective orders that were filed, the review, we have 24 lawyers in the criminal division. I have 1 vacancy. It's budgeted for 25 in the criminal division. That includes the juvenile lawyer. So actually it's 23 lawyers in the criminal division that reviewed 6,800 cases last year. The 3 death investigators, while we had extra help managing the scenes and taking initial reports, those 3 women processed 1,200 case files of death investigations. I couldn't be more proud of Steph. Oh, and the center bottom slide is something really remarkable, and those are our treatment court graduations. It's really been the mental health court to see 5 graduations in this past fiscal year. If you saw where we began, where we couldn't even get people to show up to court, that is truly remarkable. Our veterans, great support, and treatment court. Treatment court is really hard, and people, now that possession of controlled substance is a misdemeanor for the most part, people are choosing not to enter treatment court because it's easier just to take a straight sentence and not have to go through the programming and all. So 30 graduations from that. Those were 30 people who were at rock bottom and now are contributing members of our community. They go to school or have jobs, pay taxes, get their kids back, and go to a treatment court graduation, and you won't have a dry eye. So let's move on. Future challenges and opportunities. Okay, well, increased personnel costs and professional and consulting costs we already talked about. Moving the domestic violence investigator to the sheriff's office, that's mostly grant funded. It requires some backfill. And we have received a tremendous amount of grant funding for victim services, the services that we're able to provide victims with getting support for their housing situations, groceries, particularly right now. And the changes to the rules that we can provide gift cards so that people can go out and buy groceries has been dramatic. It's been terrific. And so let's go to the next slide. How we fit within the strategic plan. I'm going to let you read that because I'm running out of time and you need time for questions. But everything we do has some impact on Lane County's strategic plan. Next slide. There we go. Questions?
Questions, Mr. Abel. Larry, you gotta unmute your mic.
Ms. Pearl, first I've got to say, you've done it's been amazing with all those challenges you've faced and all the things you've done this year. It's incredible. I just really have one question. You mentioned the contract for transport services.
Yeah.
How much is that contract?
That contract is, we've done it with rollovers in the last year. So let's see if I can. Well, it's not broken out. I'm sorry. The total for that part of the division is not broken out into the budget. Let me get immediately. I will get that number and get back to you.
Thanks. And oh, just one more thing. Intergovernmental, let's see. Intergovernmental agreements. We didn't have that last year. I think it was about 125,000 this year. You know what that is?
Sorry?
So in the revenues, there's intergovernmental.
That's the domestic violence investigator with the sheriff's office.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hazen.
Yeah, Patty, I'd echo the former speaker's comments. Really impressive. You're doing a great job with limited resources, and I think we're, clearly glad to have you in your role. I'm wondering if, in follow-up to today's presentation, you could provide sort of a 4-year trend. So you've been in your position for 4 years. If you could tell us how your budget has changed over the last 4 years and how those metrics on slide 10 have changed over that same period.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Perlow? Okay, not hearing any from the phone. Thank you, Patty. I think that'll do it.
All right, thanks very much.
Okay, and we've got a break scheduled in here. If we want to, if we could, unless anybody objects, I'd like to say let's take a short one and be back here at 2:15. If there's no objections. Everybody's good? Get a glass of water. We'll see you in about 7 minutes. We'll talk to you then, Cliff. Thanks. Sheriff Harold, good to see you today.
Thank you. It's good to be seen, although in a alternate format. So ready for me to start? I can see you muted yourself. You must be ready. Well, it's good to get a chance to be with you all sort of figuratively again. Budget committee members, appreciate the opportunity for the visit, and of course, special welcome to new members John Leslie and Christopher Eaton. Hope that this presentation is beneficial and informative to you. If we were doing this in our normal format, I would have walked in and you'd be able to see that I am supported by a really terrific team, and they would be with me, and they are with me. They're on the call and available to help answer some questions. Looks like Commissioner Buck has a question.
I can't hear you. Unfortunately, you're like whispering really soft.
All right. Bluetooth speaker.
That's what it comes through as.
If I speak up, does that help, or is it still too muffled? Speaking.
Yes.
Up. All right. I'll be a little louder. I can be loud. I was saying that if we did this in our normal format, you'd see that I was supported by a really terrific team, and they would have walked in the room with me, and they are available on the call. So I'm thankful that I get to work with such terrific folks. Sorry, I'm advancing my own slides. We're trying to. There we go. The mission of the Lane County Sheriff's Office is to conserve the peace. That mission is actually given to us by the Oregon Revised Statutes, which outline what the duties of the constitutional position of sheriff are. That state statute 206.010 says the sheriff is the conservator of peace. So that's the mission of our agency. Your Lane County Sheriff's Office has 4 divisions, although internally we often forget that we have 4 divisions. We usually refer to ourselves as 3 divisions. The division we forget about is the Office of Sheriff, which frankly is just the 2 FTE, my position, and an administrative assistant. All the work's getting done in the other 3 divisions. The administrative division, which is much more than just administration, it is a lot of the functions of sheriff that are required. The Police Services Division and the Adult Corrections Division, and similar to DA Furlough, we'll get into those divisions a little farther along. Here you see the resources that our office requires to operate, largely general fund. However, we do have federal, state, and local revenues, which contribute to us being able to meet the obligation of the office. We have a fairly robust contracting system, in particular for our police services, but also for our corrections services. And grants, which we utilize in a number of different ways. We're also, our fiscal office is the fiduciary for a lot of grants. For example, when the VA discusses the treatment courts, a lot of grant funding is utilized in those treatment courts, and our office assists with applying for and tracking those monies. And so they're represented in our budget because of that. This is a slide we put together actually for the community meetings when I go out and visit with community members. And we use this, as you can see again, the big blue blocks are the general fund, which is required to support all 3 of the operations divisions in our office. And then of significance is that big red block over on the correction side. That's the public safety levy, which has allowed us to return to a reasonable level of corrections services in the Lane County. With respect to impacts to our resources due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we do have some revenue decreases. So for example, Sheriff's Work Crew, we aren't sending any crews out into the community right now. And so we do have contract partners that normally contract to have a crew come out and do work. We're not receiving that revenue right now, obviously, because we're not doing work. The RRC is a transitional housing center, basically, that we operate. It's a building right next to the Lane County Jail. And we receive revenue from both the Federal Bureau of Prisons and from the Oregon Department of Corrections to do transitional housing there. So when folks are being released from either federal prison or state prison, there's an opportunity at that center to sort of be assisted in re-entering regular community life. We're experiencing a lot fewer bed use in the center right now, again, related to the pandemic, and so a decrease in revenue there. We have some decrease in electronic surveillance fees. We use electronic surveillance for pretrial detainees as well as sentenced individuals. And it's also available to parole and probation to utilize for offenders that they are working with. Due to the pandemic, we're increasing the use of electronic surveillance, and a lot of the fees that normally go along with being a part of that program have been waived. So that would normally be revenue to us if we were charging those fees. I think the biggest highlight I want to make for you is that last bullet point, the Community Corrections Act. Community Corrections Act dollars are state pass-through dollars. There's a decades-old agreement between the state and the counties. The state said, hey, counties, we'd like you to take on supervision of felon offenders after they get out of prison. We'd also like you to take on housing convicted felons who are sentenced to less than a year. And when people get out of prison and violate the terms of their parole agreements, rather than sending them back to prison, we want you to sanction them in the local jail. And in exchange for this agreement, the state said we will, on every biennium, create a pool of dollars that we think those services should cost, and we'll divide it up amongst the counties depending on how many individuals you have in your county under supervision. So as I said, that has been going on for a number of years. We haven't always found that the state has truly given us or allocated the funding truly required to do those functions that the state asked the counties to take over. And in fact, 2 of the 36 counties in Oregon have given back those responsibilities. Lynn and Douglas County have opted out of providing these services and said, no, thank you, state of Oregon, we want you to keep those. Because of the pandemic, we know that the state budget is going to be a difficult one. And we've already had, as the governor has handed down instructions to state departments, we've been given notice that we should expect a significant reduction in the Community Corrections Act dollars. And so the Public Safety Coordinating Council in Lane County gets together. We have a budget committee. We look at these dollars and we allocate them. Parole and probation, reentry services. The jail currently funds 65 beds. 65 of our 382 beds are funded with these dollars. And so when the Public Safety Coordinating Council gets together after the state tells us what type of reduction we truly should have, then we may have to make some hard decisions about that reduced revenue. This slide, similar to the DA, shows expenditures, and obviously personnel services are always going to be of the highest cost for us. When you see those capital expenses, those come into play with, well, a lot of different things, but fleet, radio network. We're also the fiduciary for a couple of collaborations with respect to radio. So we have the Lane Radio Interoperability Group, which is multiple local partners together to take care of a radio network that we all share. And then we're also the fiduciary for an agreement that's called the Southwest 7. That was originally designed to be a 7-county cooperative. It's actually a 3-county cooperative currently, Lynn, Benton, and Lane. And again, that has to do with radio network. And all of those dollars pass through our budget as the fiduciary. Jumping into the division breakdown, as I mentioned, the Office of the Sheriff Division is the one we usually forget we even have. It's 2 FTE. Our administrative division. So I mentioned this is a lot more than administration. Some of those duties of sheriff that I mentioned are outlined in the state statute are really unique to sheriffs. So you wouldn't find other law enforcement agencies being responsible for things like civil process. So the sheriff is required to receive and serve court figures from the circuit courts. Sheriffs are required to do concealed handgun licensing. Sheriffs are required to do fingerprinting and registration of sex offenders. And so a lot of those unique functions of sheriff are housed in our administrative division. Also housed in there would be our training, PIO, our communications network coordinator. So we have an FD working on radio network things, property and evidence, professional standards, and you can see. With respect to COVID impacts to the administrative division, I already discussed some of these. I will say that we've had some great statewide collaboration on some of the changes with respect to operations in the administrative division. So as an example, the sheriffs collaborated to change the way we do concealed handgun license renewals, since none of us are bringing a lot of people into our offices right now. When we first started making operational changes, we found that those social distancing had been implemented. When folks got to our office, they would be stacked up in groups of 10 or 12 waiting for an opportunity to renew their seat. So we made some changes. We're now on a temporary agreement to do concealed handgun license renewals by mail. And then some other statewide collaboration, including the Oregon State Police with respect to sex offender registration. Again, that process is temporarily allowed to be done by phone. Once the world gets closer to the way it used to be, we won't allow sex offender registration by phone anymore. But during this time, having some accountability versus none was certainly the better option. And so we got together and reached an agreement on that. Our corrections division is our largest division in budget and personnel. We have 382 beds at the jail that are funded, and full-time 24/7 medical staff and robust mental health services. We actually contract for 6 FTE for mental health services in our jail, which frankly I'm confident is well and above what any other county is doing in Oregon. I mentioned the RRC, which is the building next door, and ESP. We have the Defendant and Offender Management Center. That's actually in the building that sits right in front of the jail. That's where our alternative programs live. So when we have sentenced offenders who are out of custody, they appear in circuit court. The judge determines that they have a sentence that they need to serve locally. They'll be sent over to the DOMC to check in, and then we will look at what type of programs we may have available for them to serve their sentence. If we can, we'd prefer not to have them serve their sentence by occupying a cell in our jail for 30, 60, 90 days. So we have alternative programs such as community service, sheriff's work crew, and some of the others that you've already heard about. I do want to mention, with respect to sheriff's work crew, we still have folks who are going to complete their sentence in sheriff's work crew. They're just not going to complete it right now. The sentence doesn't go away because we're not able to deploy the sheriff's work crew. It just delays, but they'll still complete that sentence. COVID-19 impacts to the corrections division. We kind of discussed this already. I will highlight just the fact that our team worked really, really hard to bring technology into the jail that didn't exist previously. That technology has been leveraged by the attorneys who need to visit with their clients who are in custody, because we are no longer doing in-person attorney visiting. It's been leveraged by the courts to do a lot of their hearings with in-custody individuals via technology, which wasn't done before. It's just been a terrific effort to bring that into the jail. I also want to highlight the social visiting aspect, because we had to close down social visiting because we didn't want families, again, all gathered up in the reception area of the jail. But we also recognize what a difficulty that is to not be able to have that visiting and that connection with family when an individual is incarcerated. So we actually are utilizing some funding in our inmate commissary fund, and we have provided every in-custody person with an hour of free video conferencing per week. And so normally video conferencing costs the family something. They have to sign up, register, and pay to have the opportunity to video conference. But every inmate in custody has 60 minutes per week that is free to the families to do video conferencing. And then we're also providing 60 minutes of free phone calls, since we're not able to have that in person. The last thing I want to highlight is, of course, we do have a reduced jail population right now, and that's in accordance with the CDC and the Oregon Health Authority guidance on running a jail or prison during a pandemic. I will point out, of course, that communicable diseases have been around for a long time. And when I was first learning to be a corrections deputy in the mid-90s, we had to be trained and be thoughtful about booking people into jail that have communicable diseases. One that jumps to mind is active tuberculosis. We had an individual that booked in on a regular basis with active tuberculosis. And so we had to have policies and procedures in place to be able to continue to do our job in a safe way as possible. The jail population is really a complex jigsaw puzzle that changes hourly. A combination of sentenced offenders, pretrial offenders, people serving sanctions because they've not been following the guidance of their parole and probation officer. And so the reduced jail population has occurred over time due to a variety of things. It wasn't any one single thing. We looked at our sentence population, and I mentioned before, if we can have somebody serve a sentence on sheriff's work crew, we'd much prefer that than in our jail. But sometimes we give people lots of opportunities at those programs and they don't show up. And so occasionally we would have somebody serve their sentence in jail because they've demonstrated that they're not going to do the other program. In light of the pandemic, somebody maybe got a fifth or sixth chance at an alternative program that they normally wouldn't have gotten in order to help us keep our jail population down. We've also worked closely with our partners at Parole and Probation to reduce P&P sanctions to a shorter period of time to help us with our jail population. And then the biggest change is rather unique to Lane County. We have pretrial services in our jail. Those are state court employees and county employees. They work for the Oregon Judicial Department, and they work with the delegated authority of the circuit court judges. And they review every individual who's booked into our jail on state circuit court charges. They use a risk assessment tool, and they make release decisions under a release agreement with the courts. And so those folks in pretrial services, we call them PTS, they have responded to the instruction from the Chief Justice of Oregon. The Chief Justice issued a Chief Justice order weeks ago telling state court employees that they needed to work to reduce jail populations to the extent that they were able. And so our pretrial services folks who work in our jail have been doing many more release agreements with the court than they would if we weren't in the middle of the pandemic. I mentioned that they use a risk assessment tool, and they do day to day when we're not in a pandemic. The thing that the pandemic brings is a different kind of risk. And so pretrial services has to weigh all the risks. The risk of having too many people in our jail, and then the risk to community public safety if somebody's released that shouldn't be released. So they have been doing much more releasing, and that has contributed to our reduced jail population. I'll just point out that in counties that don't have pretrial services from the state, which is all other counties except for one, the sheriff is given delegated authority from the circuit court judges to make release decisions. But in our county, since we specifically do have employees with the state courts in our jail, I am not given delegated authority from the courts to make those release decisions. So it makes us a little bit different than some of the other county jails. If you're taking a look at the way other jails have responded to the pandemic, we are a little different. Our police services division, we have about 4,600 square miles here in Lane County. We have over 100,000 people who rely on the sheriff's office to respond to their needs for law enforcement. In our police services division, we also have search and rescue, which is a mandated function of the office of sheriff. I mentioned civil service earlier. Those are the court papers. We're required to serve upon the courts, so court security, prisoner transport, bringing people into court. And then we also have a fairly small criminal investigation section. So normal parlance for that would be the detectives. Over on the right-hand side, you see our contract law enforcement. So we have agreements with the Oregon State Marine Board, with federal BLM. They provide us funding to hire deputies to provide service specifically to their area. So they pay for a deputy to be patrolling BLM land. So that deputy is not available to be helping handle calls across the county, but they are available to handle the calls on BLM lands. We have a partnership with Public Works for the motor carrier enforcement. So the road department has that. And then our largest contracts are, of course, with the cities of Crestwell and Veneta for their municipal policing needs. And then the DA mentioned to you the domestic violence investigator position. So this year we're happy to be getting the opportunity to add that investigator position to do domestic violence follow-up. As the DA mentioned, it is a really difficult caseload because of the complexity of, frankly, the cycle of abuse related to domestic violence. And so we're excited to have the opportunity to use that for a deputy to come off of patrol, to build relationships up in the DA's office, to learn some increased skills. And then we'll rotate that person back into patrol, and they'll be able to share that with their coworkers. So it's going to be a great partnership. COVID impacts to the police services division, honestly, are minimal. You would see in municipal police departments, they may have had some increased operational changes in the way they work. For example, a call that they would normally go to in person, they might handle by phone. Our reality is we have such limited resources over such a great area. We've already been handling any call by phone that frankly we could, just simply because we're driving hundreds of miles a shift back and forth across the county. Most of our call load is in progress life safety calls that we have to respond to. And so the impacts to our police services division have been pretty minimal. talking some future challenges and opportunities, and just to remind you, a little over 100,000 people, 4,600 square miles. That's quite an area to cover, and we do it most shifts with 3 deputies and 1 sergeant. That means lots of miles on a car to travel around the county. We currently have 25 deputy positions funded for county patrol. So that's removing the deputies that are contract deputies. So City of Crestwell pays for 3 deputies. Those deputies really are only providing services within the city limits of Crestwell. So they're not included in this count. It's 25 general fund deputies that provide county law enforcement response across the 4,600 square miles. Frankly, this staffing level is so low that any increase or any additional signed off deputy that's gone through training and is finally able to do solo patrol makes a big impact, and it's noticeable to us when we are able to add that. A little bit of a comparison to our municipal partners. So we have 25 FTE, roughly 110,000 service population, over 4,600 square miles. The Eugene Police Department has 91 FTE, 171,000 service population, and about 41 and a half square miles. Springfield serves about 63,000 people with 34 FTE in about 15 and 3/4 square miles. So they don't have to travel as far. Springfield has fewer people to serve, just a little more than half, but significantly more FTE to provide that service. When you go and look at the United States as a whole, the average of police officers per 1,000 population is 2.4. Frankly, that is heavily weighted by the East Coast, where both population density is high, but also policing is robust. So we know that that's frankly not that great of a comparative for us, the reality is. And we also know that sheriffs police differently than municipal police departments. But if we take a look at the Oregon sheriff's average, recognizing that sheriffs, while they provide law enforcement services primarily to the unincorporated area, sheriffs do serve the entire population of the county. Again, reminding you of the search and rescue function, the civil process function. So we have deputies driving around the city limits of Eugene and Springfield serving court paperwork. There's a number of our functions that serve the entire population. So if we look at the 36 sheriffs in Oregon and average their police certification, the police certified deputies to their county population, the average is about 0.8 deputies per 1,000. For the Lane County Sheriffs, we're at 0.18 deputies per 1,000. And so if Lane County wanted to try and get to that statewide average, we'd need 217 additional patrol deputies. That's not realistic. And we also recognize that 0.8 average is also going to be skewed a little bit by small population counties. Say Harney County, they only have 7,000 people in there. And so that 0.8 statewide average is skewed a little bit like that. So we take a look at our closest comparative counties, Marion County and Clackamas County, and we took a look at their police certified personnel compared to their countywide population. And what we see is they are pretty close, 0.36 and 0.37 respectively, deputies per 1,000. And again, Lane County Sheriff's Office at 0.18. So if we wanted to try to match to Marion County, we'd need to hire 63 additional patrol deputies. In 2019, our dispatch center entered 65,551 calls for service. Those are calls for service just for the sheriff's office. So we removed calls for service that we received for our partners that we do contract dispatch services. So that breaks out to 180 calls per day or 60 calls per shift. And again, most shifts, 3 deputies and 1 sergeant. On the graveyard shift, we do go down to 2 deputies and 1 sergeant minimum staff. Frankly, that's a call load that can't be done by the number of FTE we have available. And that results in community members that get no response, or a response that takes so long that they think, why did I even bother calling? We have here something to share from one of our dispatch supervisors that was recently shared, and I think it demonstrates really well, and some of the budget committee members have heard me talk about this before, but you know, it's sort of easy to sit and look at numbers and comparisons and percentages per 1,000, but that doesn't really tell the emotional story of truly the lack of ability we have to provide the services that we're trying to provide. So here we have a dispatch supervisor remembering a particular call where there was a dispute south of Cottage Grove with multiple people in a physical fight, a stabbing up the McKenzie Highway where the subject was still on scene and still armed with a knife, and a dispute that involved a gun over at the coast. There were 3 deputies on duty, and this was all happening at once. And I'll tell you, what really makes me passionate about talking about this is every once in a while I put on my uniform and I go work a patrol shift. And it's such a great reminder for me of the sense of an elephant sitting on your chest. When you're listening to dispatch, call the shift supervisor and say, we just had this call erupt over in Dune City. What do you want me to do with it? We've got this call pending and this call pending. Sergeant, what do you want? How do you want me to try and deal with these things coming in? That's what our folks deal with day in and day out. And I don't want to overload this, but I just had to share this. On April 30th, our swing shift sergeant sent out a briefing. And the timing, as I was prepping for this budget committee, I just had to share this with you. So this is one shift. There were 3 deputies scheduled to work. Swing shift works from 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. At 4:01 p.m., there was a crash on Deerhorn Road. A vehicle on its side, driver was ejected from the vehicle. Deputy responded and eventually arrested the individual for driving under the influence. At 4:57, there was a crash on Hills Creek Road. This was a fatality crash. There was a single vehicle and single occupant, and that individual died in the crash. At 6:52 p.m., we had a call of a suspicious subject at the Elmira Elementary School. The caller got closer to check on this individual and found an unconscious male with a gun on the seat next to him. When the deputy arrived, the individual started moving around in the vehicle. That requires additional resources. The firearm was eventually secured and that individual was arrested for DUII. At 7:20 p.m., there was another fatal crash, this time at Oak Hill and Royal. The investigation indicated that a vehicle attempted to pass another vehicle and struck a bicyclist. At 7:56, we had a deceased subject call down on River Road, east of Cottage Grove. Fire had responded to this individual a few days prior due to a cardiac arrest, and there was some indication that there might be some symptoms of the COVID-19 virus. Deputies had to respond to that unattended death. And at 8:12 p.m., deputies responded to the report of an intoxicated male who was making suicidal statements while screaming, laughing, and crying. He was taken to the hospital for an evaluation. And at 8:42 p.m., deputies responded to the report of a man at Armitage Park who reportedly found a shallow grave. To complicate things, this man who called us had a warrant out for his arrest and was carrying a machete, requiring multiple deputies to respond. So that's from 4 p.m. until 9 p.m., 3 deputies, that call. It's impossible. This particular case, we had to call another shift in to come help with this call. When we did budget kickoff with the budget leadership team, I gave them a snapshot of the month of December with respect to assault calls for service. And so I wanted to be able to expand on that. We looked at calendar year 2019 assault calls for service within the sheriff's office. We had 605 reports of assault. Now, not all of these are necessarily domestic violence assaults, although I will tell you that the very highest majority of the assaults we go to do involve family members and are therefore categorized as domestic violence calls. 605 assaults, our average response time was 1 hour and 25 minutes. We mentioned earlier when we talked about the domestic violence investigator position and how there's burnout because the cycle of abuse related to domestic violence can be really frustrating for all involved. You have somebody calling for help, but then not sure they want help. It's really hard for them to make the decision to call for help in the first place. And I'll tell you, when they make the decision to call for help and it takes 1 hour and 25 minutes for help to come, that doesn't necessarily encourage them to call for help again. Frankly, we need additional funding from our deputies to increase the number of calls that we can respond to and decrease the time it takes us to get to those calls. Some of the other future challenges that we have an aged facility in our jail. The first 2 bullet points there, the roof and the elevators. We are getting to the point of being able to address those. It's been much delayed maintenance, but we are working with the capital improvements manager, and we're scheduled for making some repairs to leaky roofs and 2 elevators. The jail is 3 stories tall, and so there's 2 elevators that move people basically all day long. And they're so old that they're difficult to maintained. So we're working on that project. The third bullet point is sort of a project that is looking to the future, and I don't know when, but to have some experts take a look at our facility and recommend potential changes down the road. So we have second floor dormitories right now, which are not in use. We don't have the funding to open them. We don't have funding for the staff to open them. But frankly, we also are not housing the type of inmate that lives well in a dorm. We do have some other dorm housing, but if we were to increase numbers of people that we could house, frankly, it would need to be single cell housing. We're also going to have them take a look at our bookend and medical areas, which are frankly outdated and inefficient in design. And when we talk about mental health issues in the jail, our medical area really could use some improvements to be able to address those. I also want to mention traffic enforcement. I mentioned here we had just recently a swing shift with 2 fatal crashes. Our county is regularly one of the top 2 worst counties with respect to traffic fatalities. We disbanded our traffic safety team due to lack of funding a number of years ago, and since that time, we've had an 88% decrease in traffic citations. As you can tell, our deputies are too busy driving from call to have any discretionary patrol time to do traffic enforcement. The one thing that we do is we utilize some traffic safety grants. Those are pass-through dollars. And so a deputy can come in on overtime on a day off or extend their shift. And rather than being part of the required group to respond to calls for service, they can go do some discretionary traffic patrols. It's a limited number of hours, and we usually try and target specific events. For example, we'll use grant funding during the Oregon Country Fair to try and help us deal with those traffic impacts. We often talk about the 3 elements involved in a reduction of vehicle crashes. That's engineering, education, and enforcement. And in this county, we're severely lacking the enforcement. And it's not just because the sheriff's office is understaffed with respect to patrol services, but our Oregon State Police Office is horribly understaffed as well. And again, I would suggest that that's not going to get better given where it looks like the state's budget is headed. Our criminal investigation section is staffed with 4 detectives and 1 sergeant. In 2019, they worked on 334 cases, 7 homicides, 4 detectives, one sergeant. And that's those 334 cases, that's just cases in 2019. Detectives work on cases that last for years. So that's not the sum total of that caseload. And I'll just point out again, a little comparison to our municipal partners. Not that we think we should have parity with our municipal partners, but I think it's a good reflection of where we're at personnel-wise. We have 5 detectives serving a population of 100 to 110,000 folks. Eugene PD has 30 detectives serving 171,000 folks. Springfield Police has 10 detectives serving a population of 63,000. Juries these days expect us to be able to present CSI level evidence or pick your other favorite crime drama show where it gets solved in an hour and they collect all the evidence they need for conviction. Digital evidence is a huge part of every aspect of every crime these days. And whereas 10 years ago, we could ask our friends at Eugene PD to have one of their people work on a piece of forensic examination of digital evidence. The reality is they're so busy now with their own caseload, we can't rely on them. Frankly, we need to add a position that would work full-time as a computer forensic examiner, because computers, including the ones we all carry around and talk on as phones, are really involved in every crime. Here we have some highlights. I want to mention our search and rescue team. That's 2 FTE that leverage over 200 volunteers. They had 135 missions in calendar year 2019, and they logged thousands of training hours. That upper left-hand corner picture is actually a fairly recent rescue of a 7-year-old boy and his mother at the Blue River Dam. Just underneath that picture is a picture of Amy Nixon. She is standing there proudly with her police certification. We had 4 deputies that completed 32 to 40 weeks of training so that they could be solo patrol deputies. It's a robust training process to be able to be deployed all by yourself out in the county in a patrol car. And then the lower left-hand corner there is our dispatch center. We partner with Oak Ridge Fire, Oak Ridge Police Department, Lane Community College Public Safety, Lane County Parole and Probation, and we're soon to be adding Coburg Police Department as partners that contract with us for dispatching services. The upper right-hand corner is a deputy on traffic enforcement. I already mentioned the grant funding that we utilize to do focus on DUI detection and apprehension, seatbelt use, and distracted driving. The middle right, is the third floor of the Lane County Jail, and those are folks that are involved in our inmate wellness services or mental health program. And those folks are doing yoga. And what we found is incorporating some progressive mental health services, including things like yoga, which teach the defendants and offenders some alternative coping mechanisms and stress relief, is beneficial to being able to manage them while they are in our facility. And then that lower right-hand corner is a picture that includes our newest canine, Billy. A generous donation to our office funded the training of Billy. He recently graduated from canine school along with his handler, pictured there, Deputy Joe John, and he'll be taking the place of a current canine who is retired. We have to mention the positive impacts of the public safety levy on providing an ability to hold some folks accountable for the benefit of community public safety. So since the levy first passed, we have had a 70% decrease in capacity-based release for fiscal year 18-19 as compared to fiscal year 12-13 before the levy. And we have released none, that's not good English. We have not released any statutory violent offenders, and we've not released any Measure 11 offenders since the levy passed. With respect to the Lane County Strategic Plan, the Sheriff's Office is confident we fit into all of those pillars in various ways. And there's a lot of words there that you don't need me to read to you, so I won't. But we are happy with the way that we incorporate into the strategic plan, and of course, we are fulfilling constitutional and state statute required functions. And I'll end with some happy pictures. Always want to end with some happy pictures. Here we have a deputy over at our Lane County Jail. And one of the things that I absolutely love to see when I get over there is deputies sometimes are working some pretty long hours. And I love it when their families get to come visit them for a meal break. And so here we've got a deputy whose kids came over to join him for lunch before he went back out to his post. That center picture is because of the relationship we have with the city of Cresswell providing their municipal policing. They pay for a full-time sergeant and 3 full-time deputies. Sounds like probably wanting to increase that. But that full-time sergeant has been able to do a lot of really terrific community policing initiatives for the city of Cresswell. And what we see there is a national night out. So for the last 2 years, Cresswell has hosted a national night out at the Cresswell City Park. And we've brought deputies sit in a dunk tank, interact a ton with the kids, obstacle courses, etc. We do a canine demonstration and spend the evening there visiting with the citizens of Cresswell, and it is a lot of fun. And then on the far right there, we have a Marine Patrol deputy, which you can tell because he's getting to wear shorts, hanging out with Smokey Bear. So with that, we'd love to take some questions.
Thank you, Sheriff Harold. Questions from the committee? Yes, Dawn.
Thank you, Sheriff Harold. I was impressed by the flexibility and humanity of allowing inmates in this COVID-19 time to be visiting, having their in-person social visiting replaced temporarily with video and telephone connections that they would normally have to pay for, but that the costs were waived, if I understand that correctly. And so I'm curious about if you have a sense of what the relative cost, so you're footing the bill right now for the video and telephone visits, and how do those costs compare with, I imagine there's costs to the social visiting as well as far as supervision of that activity. So do you have a sense, or will you have a sense of relative cost of those two approaches to them getting their family connection?
Yeah, I can speak briefly to that, and then I might tap our corrections captain because I don't know exactly what it's costing us to provide the technology. The unfortunate part is we aren't saving any personnel costs from not doing visiting the other way because the visiting post still has to be staffed for other types of visits. Attorneys, we've brought in some technology so that attorneys can use technology, but they also still have the option of coming in and visiting with their clients through the glass. And so we still have a deputy up and visiting to be able to do that. And so it's the same staffing level, although a decrease during some parts of the day. We're also, though, still needing to send inmates up to visiting to utilize technology because we don't have technology in all of the housing areas. And so sort of one half of your question is we aren't able to save personnel costs with the technology, but we are able to provide that service. And again, I think we're saving costs in other ways by making sure that our folks in custody are staying connected with families. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't go sort of off script, but frankly, we can recognize folks who aren't incarcerated and the sort of emotional toll that being told to stay home can have, and the lack of connectivity to folks. And so obviously I think we can recognize for the mental health of everybody that connectivity to others is important. With respect to your question on what it's costing us to provide that, we actually have a lieutenant who isn't able to be here, and I know he was pivotal in that. I'm looking at my corrections captain to see. He's going to jump on.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Clint Riley. I can speak to a little bit of that. We do make a little bit of money off of our commissary revenues and our telephone contracts. We make a little bit of revenue in the jail, and that money is used for inmate programs. So the money that's paying for those services right now is coming from revenue that would go towards inmate programs.
Thank you.
Mr. Hazen.
Yes, Sheriff, I'm curious about your FTE situation because it struck me in your materials that appears to be an area where the sheriff's budget is lacking resources. But according to the final proposed budget that I'm looking at, there has been no change requested in the current year. It's still at 304.75 total FTEs, no change. Can you comment?
Well, you bet. I would love to change that number, and I've worked to do so. Between 2008 and 2012, the Lane County Sheriff's Office lost 200 positions and laid off 100 people. The public safety levy allowed us to add back, I think we're at a little less than 70, and that's all related to the corrections function. But we weren't able to add back anything to our police services division with that levy. The promise to the community which passed that levy was that those levy dollars would be used in the corrections function, because the community recognized, and frankly, the whole public safety team, all parts of the public safety, including the defense lawyers, recognized that if you don't have the ability to have a functional jail, the public safety system doesn't work well. So the levy has been huge for providing corrections functions, but frankly, we have no replacement of revenue to provide police functions. We used to, and I think you heard this a little bit from County Administrator Steve Mokreisky, once upon a time, Lane County had so much timber money that they didn't need to tax. The timber money went away, then was replaced by federal SRS revenues to the tune of $40 million or so. And those monies have gone. And so if we can find some revenue source to improve police services, that is absolutely my number one goal. I've had some community conversations about that, but any addition to our police services would be an improvement. But at this point, I haven't seen an avenue to get that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and in follow-up to that, if you could share with the committee what sort of crime and incident statistics that you would suggest that we refer to that shows just how those are trending over the last few years as well. That might be a related information to staffing.
Yeah, and I'd love to be able to provide you, a website with some really robust data tracking. We keep a lot of data with respect to Lane County Jail, partly because we're able to fund personnel over there. I have not gotten to the place where I can feel like I can justify paying for an individual to do the cleaning of data that is required to be able to provide a really robust sort of data dashboard with respect to police services data. We can drag some data out, and as you've seen in our presentation, we do, but it's a fairly time-intensive purpose. I'd love to have more of an interactive dashboard where the data is always available. The other thing I want to say about data is, of course, it has to be cleaned and it has to be interpreted. As an example, the Lane County Sheriff's Office, Lane County, frankly, we have trained the residents of unincorporated Lane County not to bother reporting stuff to us. And I wish it wasn't the case, but particularly with property crime, if you call and say, my shed was broken into and something was stolen, we will send you a report in the mail or encourage you to go to our website and fill out a report. We would love for you to do that because if you fill out the report, we can actually capture the crime. But the reality is when folks call in and they get that kind of response, that they're reasonable in thinking, well, if you don't care enough to come take a report from me, then why am I bothering with it? And so then the next time something gets stolen from their shed, I would suggest that they're very unlikely to call us. So years ago, we initiated this citizen self-report form. We call it a CSR. And we tracked how many we sent out and how many we got back. And it was roughly 50% return rate. So the property crime data that we were capturing was at very least only half of what actually should be reported. And then we've tracked our CSRs over time. And the reality is we get back more of them. A higher percentage of the ones we send out, we do get back, but we send out far fewer. And I think that's because people called in, they filled out the form once, nothing happened. So the next time they decided not to fill out the form. So you can go to places on the internet where the federal government tracks crime data across the nation. And unfortunately, it's going to tell you that Lane County doesn't have a property crime problem. And it's not because we don't have a property crime problem. It's because property crime doesn't get reported because we aren't able to provide a reasonable response to the citizens when
they. Okay. Any questions for Sheriff Harold from the telephone from the committee members on the phone? Okay, Ms. Lasley.
I had a question about the, you were talking about staffing levels and the low FTE per 1,000 resident numbers. And I guess I was trying to understand, you were at 0.18 and comparing to comparable counties like Marion County, I think, and maybe Clackamas, I don't remember, and talking about if you could double to get to that level of staffing, it would require hiring 63 more deputies. But so that's a doubling of the FTE per 1,000, but I didn't understand how that related to the fact that we have 25 now. So to me, doubling would be doubling to hiring 25 more, but you were saying it would require a 63 more. So I just was not following the math there.
Yes, thank you for that question. The 25 number is budgeted deputy sheriff positions for county patrol. That 0.18 deputies per 1,000 number is actually taking every police certified deputy we have in the division. So that's the deputies working in Crestwell, Bonita, Marine Patrol, etc. And so the reality is if we did our officer deputies per 1,000 just based on the county general fund supply deputies, our rate would be even lower. But we can't really, when we're looking at Marion County, Clackamas County, we can't really tell what of their deputies are contract revenue related versus general fund related. So we just compare totals.
Other questions? Yes, so Larry.
Hi, Sheriff. I just want to say it's really impressive, all the stuff you do with your limited resources. Thank you. You didn't talk about the Office of the Sheriff as one of your departments, did you? Or did I miss it?
I brushed over it real quick, Larry, and the reason why is we oftentimes forget that we have 4 divisions. We really think of the administrative, police, and corrections. The Office of the Sheriff Division is only 2 FTE.
Yeah, I get that. But I'm curious, if I look at the sheet, it's your personnel services went down and you still have the 2 FTEs. Do you know why that is? Personal services is down 7%, and you had 2 FTEs last year and this year.
We will take a look at what the first answer that popped into my head was. I'm a cheaper sheriff than Byron Trapp, but I don't know. That's probably not true.
You took a pay cut just like athletic director at the ULO or something like that. So I have another one. Let's see. The administrative revenues, local revenues went way down, from 1,000,007 to 415,000. %76.
We have a good guess, but we'd rather drill down and be sure, so we'll look into it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
We have a pretty good guess on why that is. We'd like to drill down and be sure, so we'll get you a written response.
Sure. And then on police services, the investigations expense went way down from 2,000,001 to 1,000,003.
We'll get back to you on that one again as well.
Okay, and just one more. So on page 328, the listing of expenses, radio communication supplies went down from 2,000,008 to 940,000.
We'll take another, we'll get back to you on that one too. Again, I have a decent guess because we replaced some radio equipment last year, but let us be sure and we'll provide you that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Maybe just one.
Mr. Bosevich. Jay, go ahead.
Thank you. Just real quick, Sheriff, my back of the napkin calculation for 63 deputies works out to around 10 million. If you're taking them somewhere between 150 and 170,000 per deputy. So is that kind of an accurate, if you had 10 million more in your budget, you could be at Marion and Clackamas County levels of deputies?
I think that's pretty good back of the napkin math. The piece that doesn't incorporate would be sort of the additional support that goes along with that. So if you had 63 more deputies, you'd need more dispatch services, you'd need more record services, you probably need another property evidence technician. So, but back of the napkin math is that's pretty good ballpark.
Yeah. So, you know, probably for some of the newer folks on the budget committee, our previous revenues from the ONC lands coming into our general fund were averaging somewhere between $20 and $40 million a year in today's dollars. They're now around $4 to $6 million a year. So if we even got back to the $20 million range, we would easily have the funds to get us back to a patrol level that would make us equivalent to Marion County, still far below the Oregon average and the national average. So as we think about $70,000 in dues to an association that fights for that money, the amount of money on the table far exceeds $70,000. We'll talk about it more later, I'm sure.
Just if I could just throw out there one more thing too. A lot of you have already heard of this, but in 2013, we had the Police Executive Research Forum take a look at the way we provide services to see if there's some efficiencies out there that we hadn't figured out yet. Honestly, they came back and said, we don't understand how you get done what you get done. And they recommended to us that to continue to do what we are currently doing, we should have a minimum of 30 deputies. And what they said was, in order to help us not burn our folks out, just trying to do what we did. We have probably seen a little of that burnout. We've had a couple of folks that have decided the grass was greener over at the Eugene Police Department, although I'm pleased to say that we haven't had a lot of people doing that. I think that speaks to the team that we have. But if you think about the perf report said we should be at 30 deputies, we're at 25 today. We'd love to be able to add 5 deputies to county patrol. And, you know, that's roughly a cost of $1 million.
Joe, you want to go ahead, please?
It's nice to see you, Sheriff. 1 year we'll have that lunch. If that, forgive the naivete of these, if that's the case, why was that not requested?
Well, I never saw an opportunity to get to request that. We initially proposed our status quo budget as instructed, and then COVID hit. And I didn't ever hear that there was an opportunity to submit any sort of ad package request.
Thank you. And it's only because of a poor connection, but I did not hear what you said that 30 deputies would cost. I'm sorry. With all the not back of the napkin costs that would be attendant there too.
To get to a total of 30 deputies, which would be an add of 5, would cost roughly $1 million.
Per year, $1 million per year. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Hayden.
Yeah, related to that, last question, Mr. Chairman, in the Lane County Strategic Plan, it refers to the, get the name of this document right, the Lane County Community Public Safety Repair Plan, which was updated just a few months ago. And in that document are a number of critical system needs identified by the Sheriff's Office. I think it would be along the lines of Commissioner Bernie's comment or suggestion. I think it would be helpful to have some kind of proposal from the Sheriff's Office to say, okay, if this is what the county has, through many stakeholders, agreed is important, this is the plan, I'm accountable for delivering on that plan. Is that in the budget or is it not in the budget? And if it's not in the budget, why isn't it being requested if that's something we've agreed as a community is important to us? So is that something you could follow up on, Sheriff Harold?
Absolutely, would be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Go ahead, Don.
So since there's time, I will ask this one more question, Sheriff Harold. You mentioned a particularly challenging day when I think it was April 30th, when numerous events were happening and needed to be covered by 3 deputies. And I recognize that every day is probably in many ways heroic on the part of many of the sheriff's deputies. And that particular day, I think you said, if I understood correctly, that an additional someone was called in order to support one of the it was a very busy day and someone was called in. I presume that's an overtime expense or some kind of extra expense. And I'm just curious, looking at it on an annualized basis, how much overtime occurs, and you know, to sort of calibrate if that's a regularly recurring thing, what that means in terms of how you budget for that, or how you deal with that.
They may have the 210 budget. I was looking to see if we could provide you with our overtime budget for that particular program real quick. I'm not sure we can.
It's fine if it's just a follow up later. That's something I'd like to see some material on that later is fine.
Okay.
But there is a budget line for overtime in the expenditures. It's about $2.5 million for the year.
Okay,
So
thank
that's the
you.
plan, that's the plan. That's the plan for overtime.
That would be, is that for the whole agency? Larry's doing a great job for me. I appreciate it. Is that the whole agency number or is that just the police division?
That's the whole agency.
Okay, Pete and Dale, any questions from the phone?
None for Pete. None from me.
Okay, we're scheduled for, thank you, Sheriff Harold and team. We appreciate that. Committee, let's have a show of hands of those who would like to go ahead and take a break. If I don't see any hands, we could carry forward. Dale, Pete, do you need a break?
I'm good. I don't need a break.
I'm good.
Okay, let's just take that opportunity and move forward. We've got Ms. Gaffney with Behavioral Health and Youth Services.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Budget Committee. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about Part 1 of the Health and Human Services budget and our role in the public safety system. Before I start, I want to acknowledge a couple things. First of all, I noticed on this slide it lists just me as the director and as presenter, and I want to let everyone know for the last couple months, I have been on assignment out of Health and Human Services to our Emergency Operations Center, and Kachina Inman has been our acting director, and she's just doing a fantastic job, our assistant director. So she also is part of our team today, and I just really wanted to acknowledge the amazing work that she's been doing while Health and Human Services has been covering our Emergency Operations Center. Typically, we would start our presentation by introducing our team who's around the table today. So I'm going to virtually tell you who's around the table for our public safety presentation. As I said, we have Kachina Inman, our Assistant Director. We also have Sean Waite, our Administration and Finance Manager. So when you have hard questions about the money, Sean will be there to answer those. And then we also have Pauline Martin, who is our Behavioral Health Manager, and she'll be presenting when we get to the section on that division. And Star Felty, who is our brand new Youth Services Manager. She started with us at the end of March. I think even the board hasn't had a chance to meet her yet since we've been in our social distancing mode. So she will present the Youth Services section today. And the rest of our Health and Human Services managers are virtually around the edge of the room here to provide moral support, and you will hear from them for part 2 of our presentation next week when we talk about the rest of our department. We really do provide a critical part of our public safety system, so I'm glad that we have an opportunity to be part of the presentation today and share that with you. We don't have tons of time, so we're going to move pretty quickly through things, but with our limited time and making sure that we leave time for questions and answers, we really will try to share the story of H&HS and what I think is really the powerful work that we do to improve people's lives every single day. So with that, let's go to the next slide. This is an overview of the whole Health and Human Services Department. We are the largest of the county departments, and the 2 divisions that we'll be talking about today are highlighted there in yellow, but all 10 of our divisions really work together to promote and protect the health and well-being of individuals, families, and our community. And really the strength and power of the work that we do in community is that we leverage our unique business advantage of having all of these different services under one roof to be able to wrap around people in our community and help them on their journey and improve their lives. And I guess the other piece I would say, while our business advantage might be all of these different services, if you want to think about what's the secret sauce that makes us successful in the community, it really is our people. We have over 700 people who work in Health and Human Services. And I know during the budget address, the county administrator talked about our core values in the county of a passion to serve, a drive to connect and a solution focus. And that absolutely describes the employees in Health and Human Services who really bring their best to this work every day and work with some of the most vulnerable people that live in our community. So let's go to that next slide. I want to talk a little bit about our budget, and this is at a very high level. As I said, we are the largest of the county departments. Our overall total proposed operating budget is a little over $137 million, and we have 701 FTE. Today, we're going to concentrate mostly on the two divisions that are part of our public safety system, but I at least wanted to put that in the context of our larger department. Overall, our proposed budget does show a decrease of almost 5% overall. And I also think it's important to say that the budget we're presenting today, and I know that the county administrator talked about this as well, is really our best guess with the information that we have today. And it will be a theme throughout all of the presentations, I'm sure, is that we're still sorting out a lot of the impacts from our COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll talk about what we know so far, and I would imagine that this budget will continue to be amended as we move forward. You can see on the chart there, we have a variety of revenue resources that come into Health and Human Services. Of that $137 million budget, just a little over $12 million is county general fund. It's about 11% of our total budget. And you can see there on the slide the divisions that receive some of that general fund. And in our presentation today, I will say Youth Services is the largest single recipient of general fund in Health and Human Services. And then behavioral health gets a little bit that goes toward commitment investigations as one of the key services that we provide. The two largest revenue sources you'll see by far are state and federal revenues. So the largest is our state revenues at $45 million. And that's a place where we know we're vulnerable as the legislature will convene and talk about budgets for the second half of the biennium. And we're not sure what those impacts will look like yet. And then federal dollars are close behind at $36 million. Let's go to the next slide. When we forecast what our potential impacts are around COVID-19 for these two divisions, we know that there will be an impact in terms of our fund balances and contingencies because in current year, we're having some impact on the revenue we're able to generate. So that means we'll be relying on using some of our contingencies and fund balances and will likely carry less into next year. There's also some risk around our billing capacity, although, and each of the divisions when they present will talk about what they've been able to do to mitigate that risk. But certainly where there are services that would be billed and we're not able to see people, there's some exposure there. And today we'll talk a little bit about behavioral health in particular. And then I think there are some targeted examples of places where we aren't able to provide services. For instance, in youth services, we are under contract to do trail building with our youth services crews. And so while those crews haven't been able to be out fulfilling those contracts, we aren't drawing down that revenue. So those are some examples. On the side where we say we're not at risk, again, I want to temper that a little bit as we're still learning more as we move forward. But I will say revenues from encounters, for instance, in the community health center and in behavioral health, we've done a great job of quickly pivoting to telemedicine platforms. And again, the revenue we're looking at in this budget is projected to start July 1st. So as those services come back online, then we're more confidently able to bill for those services. And I think we've done a lot to create alternative methods if we get a second wave to be able to generate those. Again, our medication assisted treatment program is continuing to provide services. Catering over at youth services and of course our local option levy are all revenue sources that we feel are pretty stable going into next year. Next slide. The graph that you have here is just rolling up these two divisions to reflect our personnel services and our materials and services. Throughout Health and Human Services, you'll observe that most of our budget goes toward people. That's how we do our work. So we have a little over $22.7 million in personnel services for these two divisions, and almost 18 million in materials and services. These funds, these charts reflect our personnel, material services, capital, does not reflect other resources in the fund. So debt service reserves, that those are, as Christine had explained, those are in the fund, but won't necessarily be reflected here. I mentioned earlier that we have overall in the department a almost 5% decrease, and throughout programs you'll look at today and again on Tuesday, you'll notice that we brought several building projects online in this last year. And so revenue that is in our current year budget that was devoted towards those projects, we are spending. And so you'll see that revenue not carrying forward into next year through several elements of the budget. And also there's a significant one-time transfer this year from lane care to behavioral health to address some prior year issues. So that's a transfer of fund balance into behavioral health. And we really see that as a truing up of our behavioral health budget. And later, if there are questions, we can go through that specific budget. But we've been between moving funds out for purchase and renovation of our new building for medication assisted treatment and the one-time balance transfer from lane care. There's some significant shifts in there that really make that proposed budget for next year look more similar to last year's actuals rather than our current year proposed. And we can talk more about that if you would like. So at this point, I want to turn it over. We'll see how this works to others around the table. Pauline Martin, our behavioral health manager, is going to talk about behavioral health.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I will be doing a rather quick and general overview of behavioral health. So our focus at behavioral health is on individual and family wellness through a lot of partnerships and integration. So we are doing a lot of connecting people to services, especially those services that we don't have at the clinic. Some of the services that we provide include a host of psychiatric services to include medication management. We do individual, family, and group counseling. We have peer support. We have also case management or care coordination. We serve mostly the population that's commonly referred to as the SPMI, or severely and persistently mentally ill people, so very vulnerable portion of our population. We have several programs under behavioral health, and those include adult outpatient. Those are individuals who are 18 and older. And under that adult outpatient, we have the forensic program. And the slide there noted as separate, but forensic is under the same program. We also have the child and adolescence program, and that is also served through clinic outpatient and also through satellite clinics that are school-based. So we're providing services to the school-based counseling centers. We also have our protective services program, and that's the departmental unit that addresses instances or reports of abuse and neglect, primarily for our adult population. And then we have our medication assisted program that is under behavioral health that is focused on the opioid addiction, and that is serving both methadone and buprenorphine programs. They also provide individual and group counseling as well, mostly related to addictions, although there is also a small segment of the behavioral component in that program as well. We also have crisis services, mostly for the clients that are enrolled in services here. So those are crisis services for after hours and weekends. As far as the upcoming budget, we had to do a few reductions. So we have 3 positions that we had to eliminate, and those are office assistants to a peer support specialist and a supervisor. We are hoping that that doesn't, those eliminations don't negatively impact the operations of the clinic. And we are hopeful that we will recoup those at some time in the future. So we are serving around 1,800 clients at any given time, with a FTE of around 123. And our proposed budget is around 34 million, if I round it up. Next slide. So as Karen mentioned before, we were trying to factor in anything that we know of the impact that COVID-19 has on the budget. And a lot of it is still unknown, especially around the federal and state revenues. So as we get more information around any reductions or cuts as far as the state and federal revenue, will be adjusting our budget accordingly. But what we are seeing, a positive side of the COVID impact is our ability to still continue providing services through telehealth and telephone. So as you can see in the graph there, we have increased encounters, both telehealth and telephone services. We had about 50 of our staff working offsite through doing telemedicine. We are able to reach people who we would typically not be able to reach. We are also fortunate and excited to say that we are reaching people in rural communities, which we have not been able to do sometimes before. So this has been a blessing in some way. One other thing I would say around telehealth and telephone services and telehealth is that we have been reassured that reimbursement will be at the same rate as if we were seeing people face to face. So hopefully that will be the case. We have yet to see those reimbursements, but the state has reassured us that that will be the case. So next slide. I wanted to highlight some of our specific mandated program under behavioral health, because for a couple of reasons. One is that it's this program, and mostly under the forensic population, is ever growing. There's a lot of demand, a great demand for these services. And unfortunately, a lot of these services are unfunded mandates. So for some of the ones that we are able to bill, the revenue that we generate from those services is not enough to sustain this program. So these are the population when you hear initiatives around homelessness, public safety, and behavioral health, or those involved in the criminal justice system. This is the population that we are talking about. So most of the work that happens with this population is a lot of care, coordination, case management that is not always reimbursable. So we are doing a lot of work that is not revenue generating and that is not funded. So that continues to be a challenge for us as we continue to see a great demand for it with limited resources to provide those services. So Under those, I'll just go quickly through what those are. So we have the aid and assist population, and those are people that are being charged with a crime, but because of the severity of their illness, they're not able to understand the charges brought against them, and therefore are not able to aid in their defense. So we are tasked with the responsibility of stabilizing them to where they are able to understand their charges and be able to aid in their defense. We also have the pre-commitment investigation services, and these are individuals who are deemed a danger to themselves and others, and all unable to take care of their basic needs because of a mental illness. So the team that does this work is involved in looking at the evidence to support a need for mandated treatment, whether it be inpatient or outpatient services. We also have, under those mandated services, the Psychiatric Security Review Board, commonly referred to as the PSRB. And those are folks who have been charged and found guilty for crimes, but again, because of their mental illness, are not incarcerated. Then we have the Jail Intercept, or community courts that are providing services to avoid incarceration. So providing that structure to avoid incarceration. And lastly, we have Adult Protective Services that, like I mentioned before, that does abuse and neglecting investigation. And I want to end on a positive note with medication-assisted treatment, where we're going to be expanding that program. The county has purchased a new building, and we are hoping to double the people that we see in those under buprenorphine and methadone programs to reduce wait list for folks that are needing that service. And with that, I'll hand it over to Steph Felty, the Youth Services Manager.
Good afternoon. The Youth Services Division is, our next slide, please. Thank you. The Youth Services Division is mandated by statute. The division is a county agency, and the county has responsibility for the expenses of the division. Youth Services provides assessment, probation, training, counseling, education, and detention services for all youth who are 12 to 17 years old referred by local law enforcement because of what would be criminal behavior. Youth Services is funded from the Lane County General Fund, along with some state and federal grant funding for new programs. Youth Services is staffed by individuals who specialize in juvenile delinquency and in evidence-based responses to delinquent behavior. The division is organized into 8 relatively dynamic units. The first is administration. The administration unit provides planning, leadership, management, budget, and other support services needed by the division. Detention houses a 24-hour facility for delinquent youth who pose a danger to others and are ineligible for placement at a less restrictive level. Supervision, which provides sentencing reports and probation agreements for the courts, and supervises youth placed on probation by the court for offenses that would be crimes if committed by an adult. They also supervise youth who are eligible for informal supervision based on criminogenic risk level. We have a restorative services unit. Restorative services provides services focused on accountability and amends. Populations served include families involved in family law cases and youth who are referred by law enforcement for lower level offenses, and who are assessed as having low criminogenic risk. Some examples of the services provided include mediation, classes for minor and possession, including vaping devices, and then diversion level restorative classes. Phoenix Treatment is a residential treatment program. Currently, Phoenix offers a 6-month residential behavioral and skills development program for youth with accompanying family therapy. Youth Services is actually in the project of looking to expand the services offered to youth by Phoenix. The Assessment and Evaluation Center program is a 30 to 90-day program aimed at teaching skills and offering supports with additional opportunities for pro-social behavioral review and reinforcement, and then the addition of a probation violation program. And this is an 8 to 28 day sanction program within Phoenix that would serve as an alternative to incarceration and detention for youth who are appropriate for that. We also have the Nutrition Services Unit, and that offers opportunities for hands-on experience in all aspects of food service and catering, and also houses the catering done by the division. There's also Martin Luther King Jr. Education Center. MLK provides education services to middle and high school students who have active cases with youth services. This program is a collaboration between youth services and Lane Education Service District. MLK staff also oversee the community service assignments for youth involved with the division. Program services is our last unit and not our least. They provide division-wide support. They also do our files and records management and administration. They provide victim advocacy services, and then also mental health services. Additionally, the program services oversees medical and dental services that are provided to youth who are in the Phoenix program and detention. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has really changed the way youth service operates in many ways. I've listed a number of those on the slide in front of you. In addition to the examples that are there, we have some additional impacts that we've basically come across as we've moved forward this process, and there are additional potential revenue impacts that may be identified, and they include a decrease in lottery dollars, which is a good chunk of funding for MLK, a decrease in revenue from the suspension of catering, although the catering program, nutritious services program, is actually providing 300 meals a day to a COVID shelter, so we may be eligible for reimbursement through some COVID funds for that. The suspension of the school nutrition reimbursement, which would also be applicable maybe for some reimbursement through the shelter meals or some balancing of that loss of revenue. The suspension of school services for a couple weeks, which will impact some of the teacher's salary reimbursement with LESD. And then we also have the potential loss of the parking revenue that we get from University of Oregon for the Games across the way. Next slide, please. Youth Services is a member of the Public Safety Coordinating Council, and we have completed phase 1 of our section with the 10-year public safety plan, and we are actively working on phase 2. Recent progress includes incentivizing youth for goal achievement and pro-social behavior, and minimizing the use of confinement for technical violations through the implementation of an incentives and sanctions matrix. We are also, as I mentioned before, expanding the Phoenix program to serve a broader spectrum of youth need and support alternatives to incarceration. We're taking strategic action to address racial and ethnic disparities. We've commissioned a report on racial and ethnic disparities within the Lane County juvenile justice system, and the report was, we actually just recently got it back and are in the currently under reviewing it for the information that was collected and determining how to best respond. And then we're also taking additional action to strengthen the community, the continuum of diversion services that we're offering by implementing an impacts of crime class at the diversion level. One area that we definitely think may impact how we function in the future is the structure of Senate Bill 1008 and the elimination of Measure 11, which is the direct waiver to adult court for certain crimes. It is anticipated that the outline changes will dramatically modify the landscape of how youth receive services in the juvenile justice system in Lane County and all throughout Oregon. A few expected changes for us include an increase in the use of detention, and then also in the need for supervision staff to work with extremely high-risk youth that they have not had to work with before. Ultimately, though, at this time, the overall impacts remain unclear. Next up is Assistant Director Katina Inman.
Good afternoon. I'll try to move through my section quickly so we have some time for questions. I have the opportunity to highlight some of our big outcomes of the year. As you heard, the purchasing of the medication-assisted treatment building is huge for us to be able to respond to the local opioid epidemic. Our culinary program at Youth Services continues to do incredible work, and you just heard from Star about their ability to respond very quickly and provide food for our unhoused community during this time. Our folks, our youth at MLK, more than 80% of them are experiencing at least 2 levels of educational gains and credit recovery. We continue to be committed to supporting our community through our minors in possession classes for parents and youth. And the slide on the bottom left is really showing a reduction in wait time for our patients to get into screening, assessment, and therapy, which is always our goal, to get them in as soon as possible. And we've made huge headway in a community collaboration to enhance our crisis system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So next slide, please. Future challenges and opportunities. Again, the medication-assisted treatment, the renovation and completion of that renovation is huge, allowing us to expand services to 400 additional clients. This is also a revenue-generating program, which is very helpful for us at LCBH. We will continue to move in our enhanced mental health crisis system, and we have finished a planning process and really hope to move into implementation in this coming year. We've seen a change in demographics for behavioral health needs in response to COVID. We're seeing folks that were more stabilized having higher needs, and we anticipate to continue to see that in the months to come. As has been mentioned, we anticipate impacts at the federal and state levels, and we'll be monitoring that very closely. We will continue to increase community-based diversion, continue to increase best practices at youth services, and expand some of our programming at Phoenix to expand access to behavior intervention. And lastly, we're thrilled with some of the opportunities that have arisen in midst of COVID as we're being able to use telemedicine and reach some of our rural communities. Last slide, please. So alignment for our strategic plan, I just want to highlight a few things. Under safe and healthy counties, we will be continuing to increase our access of behavioral health, including prevention and treatment of services. We will continue to work towards our 10-year safety plan at Youth Services. And under vibrant communities, continued efforts to strengthen our restorative practices. Equity will continue to be paramount for us here, and engaging with our community through a variety of ways, but specifically with our advisory boards, will help and guide us in the coming year as we need to continue to respond to the needs of our community. And of course, the medication-assisted treatment clinic is a beautiful addition to our robust infrastructure. And lastly, and most importantly, as Karen mentioned, our greatest asset, our people and our partnerships. We have incredible people here, and we will continue to invest in training and development opportunities and employee engagement. And our partners will be critical as we continue to move forward in this COVID response. That is it for me, and I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief here and just give you a couple of heads up. You know, I serve on with the Public Health Advisory Committee. Can you hear me? Am I all right?
Got you, thanks.
Okay, good, thanks. So I'll be very brief. I serve with the Public Health Advisory Committee, the Mental Health Advisory Committee, the Human Services Commission, the Poverty and Homelessness Board, and the Community Health Council. I also attend the Mental Health Summit. So just a heads up as to questions that I'm going to send in written form. The first is regarding telehealth, and Pauline, directed to you on this one. Telehealth, we are reaching more into rural communities using telehealth, and right now we're using it more than ever because of the COVID. I'm going to have questions regarding the effectiveness of telehealth, how it does compare to face-to-face work with the patients. The second is regarding reimbursement being the same for telehealth as far as compared to face-to-face. Is that something that's going to continue after COVID, the same reimbursement rate? I'll have that question. You don't need to answer that right now. Last year, we put $1 million into a research on a adult crisis center, something that we talk about quite a bit at the Mental Health Advisory Summit, the Mental Health Summit. Are we putting money into it this year? You can answer that one right now, or you can defer if you prefer. And then the same question with the Youth Crisis Center. We're in the process of building a Youth Crisis Center. Mr. Mokrahajski in his budget message talked about potentially switching from the focus on the SERBU and perhaps more focus on a different facility that we have at the MLK campus. So those are going to be my questions, Pauline. Then the one that you may be able to answer right now is regarding the Adult Crisis Center, which we're focusing on. We hear about it quite a bit at the Mental Health Summit. Are we putting money into it this year during this budget cycle? We have $1 million in the last budget cycle. And then I do have one more question, Pauline, if you have an answer to that one.
Okay. So I'll get started, and hopefully Karen or Katrina can help me with this. So we have had a lot of conversations, and we had several work groups working on the implementation of the crisis center, or several steps working towards the crisis center. And over the last few weeks, especially since COVID, we were wondering about maybe revisiting that and seeing what the immediate needs are. And I would defer that to Karen or Katrina to add on to that. But we still have that work central to, the need, because we know we do need to address the crisis in the community. I think the question at hand right now is, what is the immediate need given the pandemic? Katrina and Karen.
Thanks, Pauline. The piece I would add to that is just to answer the technical part of your question, Commissioner Farr, in terms of the budget itself. That money was never moved into the Health and Human Services budget. It is still in the general county budget. So there isn't an issue for us as a department to have to budget that money. The planning work is absolutely still continuing. And as Pauline talked about, when we probably just last week touched base about that particular project, we talked about the emerging need for crisis outreach and some other components that might not be building a brand new building right now, but the services are critical for us to move forward. So that planning piece is still happening.
Thank you both. That is as much depth as I need for that question right now. I'll ask more in depth as we move into different phases of our meetings. But my next question then, and thank you, Mr. Chair, we don't have time to have answers in depth to the questions that I have, so I will be posing them in written form and asking for written response to those. Thank you. I'm concerned about the reductions in staff in behavioral health. You mentioned that we have a peer support supervisor, a supervisor, and an office assistant. Those are the three positions that are being reduced. And we know Mr. Mokrahajski in his budget message talked about swimming upstream so we can meet crises before they become larger, more expensive, more difficult to solve crises downstream. And where we're with peer support supervisors, peer support seems to be a way that we can move upstream, swim upstream to begin to address issues before they become more expensive issues. You don't need to go into too much detail right now, and I don't want to ask questions that really have much deeper answers required. But regarding peer support, that seems to be an area that we need to put more resources into as opposed to taking resources from. So we'll get more into those questions as we get deeper into the budget, and I will ask for the answers in written form. So thanks very much, Mr. Chair. You indulged me in a little bit more time than really I should have taken. There are 10 members of the budget committee. I'm only one of them, and so I've taken more than my 10% of the time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, do you mind if I give just a very brief answer on the question of the peer support specialist before we move on?
Please do.
We can give you a more thorough answer in writing, but I did want to say that we very carefully looked at where we eliminated those positions, and I wanted to make sure everyone understood that those are vacant positions in our budget right now. So we're not eliminating any positions that will impact individuals. Clearly, services matter, and that's what we looked at, is what's the impact to the community. We added a number of positions, including multiple peer support specialists in this last year and a half. And so much of our work on the behavioral health budget has been to true it up to what the resources are and balancing what the needs in the community. So we'll give you a more thorough answer in writing too.
And thanks, Karen. Please don't let it be an indication that I mistrust your judgment, which I do trust implicitly. Thank you.
Commissioner Buck.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Hold on a minute, Pete.
I was going to ask two questions. First, on the telehealth, you had a slide from the COVID effect of telehealth, and it was 45% in person, 45% telehealth, and 9% virtual. And I was curious what it was before COVID, or if that was the before, or if that's the after. I was just curious about the comparison. My second question was, it looked like in the separate list of risks under COVID that there were some pretty serious financial things that could be headways coming along for this particular department. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the impacts that could potentially place in this department.
Sure. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Buck, and I'll start, and then Pauline, if I miss anything, please come in with the details. I just want to give such kudos to our staff for implementation of telemedicine in response to COVID. Prior to COVID, we didn't do any telehealth in either the health centers or behavioral health. We did some phone call, some telephonic services, but the move to telehealth with video is brand new since COVID, and it happened very quickly, and I'm really proud of how responsive the department was in doing that. So that's new, and Pauline may be able to tell us exactly what the percentage of telephone services were prior. In terms of risks, I think we could take a lot of time to drill down on specific ones. I would say I'm most concerned about the state budget and what the impacts might be there, because certainly in the two divisions that we talked about today, there's significant state resources that go into behavioral health services. On the public safety side, we think about our general outpatient clinic services, and then that list of mandated services that Pauline reviewed, which really are largely directed towards the public safety interface. And those are not adequately supported by fee-for-service billing insurance. So that's where we need the state general fund resources and grants to come in alongside. So I worry about those. What I know is that as a state, there is such a significant priority around mental health right now and homelessness that I'm hopeful that we'll do well as the state tries to rebalance its budget, but there certainly is a concern there.
Commissioner Sorensen, question?
Thank you so much. Yes, I have two questions. The first is regarding the likelihood that we will attempt to get reimbursed for things that we have not previously been reimbursed for. And we will continue, of course, to try to get reimbursed for the things that we have been getting reimbursed for. I'm wondering if there's anything in terms of controls or auditing or preparation for auditing, or I guess in my case, I'm fearing that a government agency, maybe even one that we don't even know the initials for, will say that we have not done what we needed to do to get reimbursed, or worse yet, they paid us money and then they want it back because we didn't do it properly. So could you give us some sense that there's an attention toward the process that we'll be going through to get this reimbursement, whether it's FEMA or whatever it is? And I have a second question after Karen gives a response on this one.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. Absolutely, we are cautious about making sure that we are following all the rules and regulations. When we meet on Tuesday, you'll have an opportunity to learn more about our Quality and Compliance Division that has a huge focus on compliance. But I'm going to ask Sean Waite, who, in addition to being our admin and finance manager, has been the Emergency Operations Center Finance Section Chief, who's been really doing the deep dive into FEMA and all the rules. If you want to talk at all about that process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen, and Chair Commissioner Sorensen. That's a really great question, and it's something that we are watching very closely. We have been working closely with Robert Tintle and his finance team in Central Finance, and we've been in close communication with our liaison with the state and FEMA and asking questions about what would be considered reimbursable. What is the process? Making sure that we are in compliance with filing paperwork on time, that we are running expenditures past them, about whether that could be considered reimbursable or not. So we are following FEMA guidelines very closely. And then when you look at the other side, there's also potential to get additional federal funds through federal grants. And so we are reading through all the grant requirements at this time and then filling out the grant applications as appropriate. Both of the processes, FEMA and the stimulus packages, the federal grants, require a significant amount of backup documentation. And so we are working to make sure our T's are crossed, I's are dotted, to make sure we have all of that information. So we are doing due diligence to make sure that we can capture all that and that we won't be giving back any money.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that reassurance. Now, I know that somewhere else in the budget process we'll be going over the budgeting for a performance auditor, and that position has not been filled recently, but I want to re-emphasize the importance of having those funds that we can defend appropriately in the event that someone down the road claims that we have not followed the rules. I think a performance auditor would be important. Well, my second question is that the increased use of telemedicine or appointments or mental health appointments or physical health appointments seems like a really good thing, but I do have a concern that much of the mission of the Department of Health and Human Services is to help people that are poor and they don't necessarily have the equipment to participate in this. And this is known in public education circles as the digital divide. I'm wondering if Karen, maybe you could square the facts that the poorer people in our community are the ones that need the Department of Health and Human Services services, but they are in fact the very people who don't have access to the digital equipment. And how do you square that, Karen?
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. And I'm actually going to ask Pauline to respond. Since we've been rolling this out, what's been your experience of our clients' ability to participate?
So you're right. There's a big section of our clients that are not able to afford. And before I answer that, telehealth is not for everyone. So we have a big a section of our population that is not able to do telehealth for one reason or another. May it be, the paranoia that gets in the way of, having a conversation by phone. So we've had some select services on site for some of those who are not able to do telehealth. We also have been particularly aware that there is an acute divide when it comes to those who are able to afford and those who can't. And fortunately, there has been some resources in the community where we've been able to get to connect people with additional minutes on their phone, for example, or providing resources for additional phone for a family that doesn't have one. So there are efforts to address those people that don't have the devices. We also know that there's areas that people are not able to get internet. So while there is this great opportunity, there's still some people that are not able to get that, but we are mindful of that and providing other options for people as well.
Thank you so much. And to the extent that you have any data on this, or as you're gathering it, I think it might be helpful in answering my question, just to show that perhaps the services are gravitating toward those people who have devices and whose problems allow for greater staff engagement with those people because they have those devices. But on the other hand, that means that fewer people who do not have access to those resources are not being served. So thank you so much for your good work.
Sure, thank you. And we'll get some data to kind of show that. We've been trying to gather that and our ability to reach more rural communities. We are starting to track that as well.
Commissioner Rosevich and then Commissioner Bernie after that.
Thank you. Just very quick, Pauline. We started a pilot in Florence with mobile mental health crisis response. And I think we're in phase 1, which is entirely within the city of Florence right now. What are the restrictions on moving to phase 2 and expanding it out to rural Western Lane County?
Good question. So I think we were waiting to see how this works out. So I think it's going very well. So we are at a place where we can start looking at replicating this into the other rural communities.
So,
and can I add something to that answer? Because
sure.
I think I might know what Commissioner Bozovich is moving towards. I know one of the barriers in being able to expand that is to be able to have a local law enforcement partner in those areas outside of the city of Florence. And because our mobile crisis really is a partnership between a mental health responder and the local law enforcement. So City of Florence is able to provide their police department. And last I heard, we're still, that's a barrier for unincorporated Lane County out in that area because of the lack of patrol.
Thank you. We talked about patrol in the sheriff's presentation. I just wanted to bring that out so folks understand that lack of patrol also is causing us to have issues on being able to expand, a cahoots style response to rural areas. So thanks.
Thank you. One day I'm going to learn how to do as effectively as Commissioner Bozovich and ask questions I know the answers to so I can make a point, but I actually don't know the answers to these questions. First, I would like to say to the Budget Committee that we're on the subject that we are on, and Commissioner Sorensen did something that I call dropping a hint about something that does not relate to the topic when he talked about the performance auditor. So I want to drop the hint that I disagree with that and that in a time of scarce resources where residents need services desperately, and the county has a pretty good track record here, I will be all for putting money into service delivery, be that deputies or behavioral health people or whomever. But my questions, one, is the culinary program currently operative?
Star, do you want to talk about what service level we're doing at culinary?
Yeah, I can talk about it. Right now, we are not having youth in the kitchen, but the program is still operational with staff. And that's also what's going on over with the MLK cruise is currently the staff and nutrition services are providing 300 meals, 150 breakfasts, and 150 lunches to the COVID shelter. And then MLK staff on the horticulture crew are trying to maintain the contracts and trails as this goes on, but without youth. So we're trying to do all the work without the kids for now.
No, it's unbelievable. We're all trying to do all the work plus with less people. The reason I was asking that is I'm just so aware of the situation with food banks and the hungry now, and I just didn't know if there was capacity there to help feed others. But that's fine. In terms of telehealth, it seems as if this year we're being required to utilize and develop and expand that service, notwithstanding what Commissioner Sorensen said, that the digital divide may impact that, obviously. I hope you're also studying. In fact, I'm going to encourage you. This doesn't mean you have to hire someone to do it, but I mean, I encourage you to evaluate as it's being used, the cost effectiveness of it for greater outreach to rural areas, how that can be integrated in when we get into a post-COVID environment, into the delivery portfolio of behavioral health. I'm making the assumption that it's a great way to reach more rural residents. So I would love to have data to that effect. I'm very interested, one of the jobs, we don't have the job description in the youth services budget related to community health worker. If the job description is in the voluminous package we have, if you'd kindly email me and direct me where I'd love to see that. I'd love to see the relationship, if there is any, between that and these new COVID virus tracers. They're talking about funding at the state level to communities, because as I've seen, my research and watching TV suggests that these tracers are really looking into everyone in the social and resource networks of these people and identifying resources that they can access and how. And it may be a wonderful, again, database to begin looking at more community-based health workers integrated into this division service portfolio. And
Commissioner.
Oh no, please, I'll stop because I only have one more question. Thank you, Karen. Go ahead.
I was just going to respond to that. I know that Jocelyn is around the outside of the room right now, but she'll be at the table on Tuesday, and she's been doing a lot of work around contact tracers and what that will look like for Lane County and the teams we're pulling together. So maybe on Tuesday we can talk more about that.
Good, because I think it will have more positive ramifications for what we do than just the immediate needs. So thank you very much. Finally, you discussed positions that weren't being filled. Now that to me sounds like a RIF, a reduction in force. Maybe it's not, you can explain it to me. But my understanding was that we're trying to preserve all jobs and lay off no one. And maybe not replacing people that leave is not perceived that way, but that's how I see it. Am I incorrect?
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. The way we typically talk about a reduction in force, that would be a filled position when that's eliminated and a person loses their job. So we do, we have eliminated vacant positions over time. That's not an unusual thing for us to do as needs change and budget shift. If we lose a grant, for instance, we might eliminate positions. In this particular case, I will say one of those 3 positions has never been filled. It was a newly created supervisor position that certainly we could use, but it hasn't been filled. And then I don't know for sure on the other 2, but we have been adding a lot of positions at behavioral health over the last year or 2. And so it really is needing to true that back up to what the revenue is for that program.
Thank you, Karen. Now, can you, and then I'll be done. And thank you very much, Chair. Now I feel just like Commissioner Farr. I'm using more than my 1/10 time. I apologize. Will you be able to share that plan, having spoken with whatever union, if there was, that represents these positions, and have them understand and agree with that, or might that cause an issue?
Commissioner Burney, I'm happy to share it, and I think that has already been shared with the union that's involved for the 2 represented positions. Typically, that isn't something that needs to be bargained when they're vacant positions, and our contract talks about how we will approach those if we ever need to eliminate a filled position.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, 2 quick questions. Comment, Karen, if you go back 3 slides, the graph of highlights.
Great. Can you hold on for a second for me? I'm gonna have Larry go for a second, but Larry.
I'm sorry, your microphone is breaking up. I'm having a hard time hearing.
I haven't started talking yet. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good. Thank you.
I just have a few quick questions for Pauline on the budget. The lane care transfer you were talking about earlier, is that what shows up, the $6 million fund transfers?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then the other one, I noticed on the program budget, behavioral health services is down about $3 million, and forensic outpatient services is up about $2 million. I'm just kind of assuming it was forensic was in behavioral health last year.
It's so hard to hear you, so I didn't catch the last part that you said.
Okay.
You're breaking up.
And I think I heard you, so let me correct me, Larry, if I'm wrong. I think you were asking if the forensic outpatient services that's now its new line used to be part of the behavioral health services above it. And if that was your question, the answer is yes. Those were folded in together in the past, and for this coming budget, we've split them out.
Okay, and then just one question about youth services. The fund transfer of about $7 million, where does that come from? In resource.
This is Sun Wait. So I would like to repeat the question. I had a hard time hearing you. Were you asking about the fund transfer of $7 million that goes into youth services?
Yes. Where does that come from?
That's general fund.
General fund. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thanks. That's all I have.
Great. Chris Hazen, thank you for working with me on these. On the order. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, I think that was my cue. Karen, if someone can go back 3 slides to the highlights, there's a graph in the lower left that I think maps the time to treatment. I blew that up and it's illegible. It would be great to get a legible copy of that one graph. The other question is about the $1 million in the budget for the Behavioral Health Crisis Center, which is part of the updated strategic plan as a key activity area. There's $1 million in the budget to, and I'm not sure what it's for. Will it be complete for that amount? Is that what's in the budget? Is the completion of it, or what is in the budget this year? What's remaining?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm going to start, and then if if anyone wants to, Kachina or Pauline, fill in behind me. First of all, I apologize about the graph, and we absolutely will get you one that's legible. And then on the crisis center, that's the piece that, so when the board put that $1 million on the table, as it were, it was to incentivize investments from other partners in the community as well. It wasn't with the belief that $1 million would cover all of the costs for the kind of improved mental health crisis system that we need in the community. So that's how we've been approaching that project, is that the county wants to be the convener for that conversation, and have had really fantastic planning work with our public safety partners, the sheriff's office, the courts, local law enforcement, the district attorney, as well as our not-for-profit behavioral health partners and the hospitals, to envision what does our system need to be what does it need to look like to be a more effective crisis system. And that's actually the middle bottom row picture is the graph that we presented to the board at the end of the phase 1 planning of that. And the piece that during the last couple months during COVID, there's been a rethinking that we need to check in with our community partners to test whether there's agreement on this or not. But the thought is that perhaps instead of working to create a brick and mortar place as our next step, it might be that in this post-COVID recovery environment, it's more important to get some people out on the street to do outreach teams and really help meet the more immediate crisis needs. So that reconvening is due to happen in May to check in with partners and do a reset on the plan. Kachina or Pauline, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't have anything to add.
Neither do I.
Okay, can everybody hear me now? Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Farr, did you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just ever so briefly, we talked about, each of us talked a little bit about telehealth. And we're going through the COVID crisis right now with so many things to lament about what is happening. We're going to find some things that we can rejoice. Right now, we're being forced into using telehealth, and we're finding that it's working in many cases. It's an opportunity for us to perhaps get a little bit more engaged, because the future may indeed include a great deal more telehealth. So COVID in this situation is giving us a reason to do something that we may not have done in a more robust fashion. That's going to produce potentially good outcomes, at least give us some data to base our future decisions on. I'm really excited about it, particularly, Commissioner Burney, with your question, got the response that we're digging deeper into rural communities, whether or not we have a technology divide. The technology divide is a different issue that we need to deal with, but getting health deep into the rural communities without forcing people to have to drive from Oak Ridge to the metropolitan area to get treatment, I'm pretty excited about the possibility. And while COVID gives us much to lament, there may indeed be some things that we can rejoice at the end of the process. So thank you for all of the questions regarding telehealth.
Thank you. Dale, I want to check real quick just to make sure you on the phone. Do you have any questions for behavioral health? I guess not. Okay, I think that's good for right now. Thank you, Karen, and all the staff there. Really appreciate your presentation today. Again, if you, the committee members, if you have any additional questions that come up for behavioral health and youth services, if you get those to the budget staff, that'd be great. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
Okay, and then
Right.
committee, raise your hand if you want to take a break. Okay, looks like we're gonna take a break. Let's try to do a short one. Let's try to do a 5-minute and be back at 4:30. We'll see you then. I've got you right here on the list, Greg.
Oh, look at you.
Oh, and by the way, I shared your comment with Michelle. She appreciated that comment of yours.
Do you remember when I dyed my hair? Did you see my purple hair for the United Way fundraising effort a year and a half back?
I did not see that. I'll have to get a picture of that.
We'll make sure you do.
Okay. Okay, let's see. On screen, I have Commissioner Bosevich, myself, Mr. Abel for the committee, Commissioner Farr, Commissioner Buck, and Ms. Leslie. And is Commissioner Burney on the phone?
Yes, he's getting there. Just give him a minute.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think we're ready. We're going to go ahead and move forward. Next up is parole and probation. Greg, take it away.
Chair Vlogman, committee members, commissioners, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Parole and probation is one of the divisions within operations. I am pleased to have Donovan Dumeier, the manager of the program, as well as Lynn Smith, the accounting analyst for parole and probation today. Because I am on the phone, I am going to turn it over to Donovan for the majority of the preparation. Donovan, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, good afternoon. Look at all this technology. This is great. I feel like I'm in Star Trek or something. So I am not Jill Allen. I am told that Jill Allen is showing the marker there under my name. So I am Donovan Dumeier, and I work as the manager within parole and probation, and happy to be there and happy to do so. In Lane County, in building a better community, our parole and probation division really stands by its mission to improve the quality of life. And it's something that our division and our folks really take serious. And we do so much in training and trying to improve our efforts to be better, to do the most we can with the resources that we have available. As of April, we've identified 2,731 clients on community supervision. Week to week, I can say that this number varies. And I've talked about it in presentations past. But as you can see, in Lane County, our high and very high risk population, 14,001 as of mid-April, is really kind of inverted from a lot of other counties. And so this is based on our assessments and our assessments that we use to identify the risk that people present in committing new crimes. So we've got a lot of high risk folks that we work with here in Lane County. And I will also venture to guess that right now, with those 2,731 clients, we see those numbers week to week kind of ebb and flow. And my guess is once we identify some level or increased level of normalcy, we will most likely see, as the courts catch up, those numbers rise as well with probations. Currently, we have 58 total FTE within parole and probation's division, and I will say 40 of those are are officers. And so I will also say that we take a lot of pride and knowledge, and as such, we've developed specialized caseloads. And so over the years, we've put a lot of time and effort into really understanding the areas that our folks, our client population struggle with. And so some of those expertise that we've developed are sex offender supervision, domestic violence. We've put a lot of effort into treatment court, adding drug court, veterans court, mental health court to that mix. Over the last 4 years, we've really pushed our Justice Involved Women's Initiative, which really focuses on a whole different set of risk need factors. And also recent years, our 416 program, which focuses on our downward departures as kind of a diversion to prison program. And then our AIP, assisting those folks that are transitioning from prison. Next slide. Looks like, as you can see, community corrections and related services are primarily funded by state revenues. This includes pass-through dollars to support system services. This funding supports division operations and client services, and those client services would include housing, treatment services, jail, and alternative programs that we have. And you can see, based on the pie chart there to the right, that the bulk of our funding comes from the state. We do have a sliver there that we receive some general fund through the sheriff's office, and that covers a position that allows us to collaboratively work with alternative programs and really work with frequent users of our system and really providing those handoff services. Next slide. As we look at 2021 COVID-19 resource impacts, like most folks in the community, we see supervision fees as a kind of on the decline based on some of the unemployment rates that we've seen. We've also seen a potential 8.5. So currently we've been asked by the state to conduct an exercise that really allows us to evaluate the impact of an 8.5% reduction of all state related funding streams. And so given that we've already, and the state budget is really on a biennial basis, and so given that we've already allocated funds for year one, in year two, we're really looking at closer to a 17% reduction in the biennium. So this is a big exercise, and in that we've estimated roughly with the community corrections allocations dollars, we'd be seeing a 2.1 million reduction. And then with our justice reinvestment dollars, we'd be seeing just under 400,000 in which we would have to find a way to work through those programs. Looking at the next slide, looking at the 2021 budget details, our division expenditures include primarily personnel, materials, services, and capital expenditures. It does not include transfer expenses, debt services, and reserves. In September, we expect to lose a grant-funded position that pays for a corrections tech. And this corrections tech has really been assigned to our treatment court, and it provides court case management services. And so this has been a valuable position that I think the courts and parole and probation has really found benefit in, and really helped to carry the load of our treatment courts. And so that'll be a position that we expect will be going away as a result of grant loss there. I'm happy to announce that we're fully staffed. As a standard practice for the county, we currently carry a 3% vacancy variance. And this is just as we anticipate retirements and other possible vacancies in the future. With our relocation, our established project reserves for our new home has been transferred to the capital budget. So that's no longer in our hands there. And then when you're looking at highlights for 1920, I'm extremely pleased to announce that we are fully staffed within parole and probation. And if you can see the picture there at the top line, look at all those smiling faces. So extremely pleased. And this really does take us from a point of really responding from a quantity-based approach and really putting out fires to more of a proactive approach and working with people in case management and really delivering services that we know are proven to be effective. And I think having a full staff and a full team of officers that can really be specific and deliberate in targeting needs and risk is really going to help project us. And we're going to see, I believe, a big impact in what we can do in the community. Our parole and probation team are eager and excited for a new home. As you can see, the county has purchased property relocation. We've been working with GMA to develop some schematics as to what our new building could look like. And I can tell you that there is a lot of energy and a lot of excitement as to what this could mean for us. And it really would take, I believe, some incredible work by some just great people great professionals, and it's only going to increase their effectiveness in providing them with the environment that's conducive of change. So this is very, very, very much appreciated. And I know, like I said, there's a lot of energy around our relocation. Last year, our 416 completed our 3-year randomized control trial. And I will say that with the 416 program and the prison diversion, this program early data supports just a great success and really identifies that this program is something that we should look at duplicating in the future. The results that we have received from this, when you compare it to the business as usual, we saw a reduction in arrests, convictions, and incarcerations. And this is, at this point, data is 1 to 2 years, but it's incredibly promising. And I will say that when we're looking at evidence-based practices and we're looking at data and outcome measures, this is just a perfect example of the culture of parole and probation, especially through justice reinvestment. And it also is something that's a part of our culture, and just making sure that what we're doing is effective and how do we become more effective in our efforts. And so evaluating, measuring, reviewing data is something that we take very serious, and that's something that we do regularly. And all important to help maximize our efforts with reduced or with limited resources. Future challenges. Prior to COVID, the actual cost study projected a $50 million shortage to community corrections. It was anticipated that community corrections would receive $25 million in this last emergency legislative session for the last biennium. Community corrections has not yet received these funds, and we're uncertain as to what those future funds will look like for parole and probation. This has ultimately impacted a shortage for our 416 program as well. So in addition to CCA dollars, justice reinvestment is also subject to an 8.5% reduction exercise. And so all these funding streams are really being evaluated. Compounding the lack of funding from the emergency session, as I mentioned, the governor did ask us to participate in an 8.5% reduction exercise. And as I mentioned earlier, projections roughly would show a $2.1 million reduction in community corrections allocations and close to a $400,000 reduction in justice reinvestment. As far as Lane County strategic plan, safe, healthy county, in alignment with our brand, all our efforts can be tied to improving the quality of life. Our case management, specializations, trauma-informed efforts, working with victims, making victims whole, all those things absolutely tie to safe, healthy county. Vibrant communities, we strive to build a better community through effectively responding to risk, need, and barriers that support healthy individuals and families. And if we do this work right, we have the ability to impact generations, and we know that. Robust infrastructure, we're working to develop a new location that supports our brand, which includes our expectations, our values, our mission, and our vision, and enhance all of our effectiveness in being able to do the work that we do. Our parole and probation partnerships, this is something we take incredible pride in. We're happy to be a contributing partner to our Lane County parole and probation team and our community justice system. So Sheriff's Office, sponsors, so many partners that we collaborate with that are just part of an incredible mix to really see communities, our community in particular, improve. So questions?
Any questions from the committee? Commissioner Burney, please.
Thank you. Perhaps you could clarify this for me. I keep hearing in meetings that the request for an 8.5% statewide reductions exercise, since it's for a biennium, really means a 17% cut in vulnerable or subject to that budgets next year. From 7/1/20 to 6/30/21. Is that correct or no?
That's what I reported on. We've used year one of the biennium, and so based on the funds that we've received, it would be, you're absolutely correct, closer to a 17% reduction in the second year.
Thank you. That's my only question. Thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Pete, do you have anything? I hear nothing. Okay, sounds good. Really appreciate that update. And we're good to go.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
The last item on the agenda is committee business. Do any committee members have any business to bring forward? Commissioner Burney.
Hey, I apologize. This is more of an announcement. I just wanted to share with you that with everyone here, I just learned on the news hour this evening, they're doing a 5-minute segment about reopening different parts of the country. And the person who will be the expert is an old friend of mine who's a professor at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. Her name is Christina Banks, and I just wanted to share, hey, I don't know if it'll be good or bad, but I've known her for almost 50 years. Thank you.
Any other committee business items from committee members? Okay. Christina, do you have any updates from budget staff?
We do not, other than I would just remind you that the next meeting is next Tuesday at 2:30. It will be go-to meeting, so using this same format. We have emailed out to the committee right before this meeting started today some question and answers, so you might not have had a chance to see those, but we will also continue to forward you materials until Tuesday's meeting. So please let us know if there's anything before then.
Great. Thank you, Christina. I do have to ask one question because I know that my mic wasn't working very well earlier. Is it working better now?
It is.
Great. No.
There is some strange extraneous noises happening now, but I don't know if it's related to your mic.
How about now? Is that better?
Yes.
That was Pat. Okay. Seeing no other business, we'll adjourn the meeting. We'll see you all next Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.